welcome to another episode of the Solutions Podcast, everyone. So we would like to sort of explain what happened here. We had some problems in the middle of the episode. Well, actually not in the middle. 30 minutes in, you're going to notice some stuff. So we have this beautiful camera we started shooting with. So Michael's going to...
Well, basically, here's the deal. So we're getting some new equipment and, trying to make things better. So if you guys have any feedback, by all means, please tell us, hey, listen, here's some good suggestions. Here's some great audio equipment to use. Here's how to set it up. Here's some good... Anyway, so we normally film this on an iPhone, but we got this beautiful Canon 6D Mark II DSLR, thinking, hey, this is going to be amazing. It takes great photos. It's going to make great video.
We use it for photography, but then we decided, you know what, we should try to shoot with it. And so this is how we started.
Seemed like a good idea. Had to get separate microphones for this thing. And so we get 29 minutes, 59 seconds in, and it shuts off. And we're like, what the heck is going on here? I mean, okay, no big deal. We'll just, get it set up. And we thought, surely there must be a setting where you just change it to extend this. Turns out, no. This is a hard limit on these DSLRs, most of them, where you can only record for 29 minutes and 59 seconds. I looked it up. Apparently what happened was back in the day, first of all, these things used to overheat, but that's long ago. They don't overheat anymore. Then there's something called FAT32, which is the storage format, which had a file limit of 4 gigabytes, and so it was restricting you to that. That's long past as well. And so now there's no reason that you can't record for hours and hours. But apparently there's some rule from the European Union where they tax the imports of video cameras, 8 to 12%. And the definition of a video camera is it can record 30 minutes or more. So they put this hard limit in here so they don't have to pay this extra import duty, and they can sell the cameras for cheaper, which to me is just totally retarded. A friend of mine used to pitch to me the Canon Advantage. It doesn't seem like much of an advantage right now.
Right.
It seems like more like the iPhone Advantage, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
There are some DSLRs that can go more. There's some Panasonic one apparently.
29 minutes and 59 seconds. So doesn't make sense for us to be stopping. As you guys have seen from other episodes, we shoot for at least an average of 2 hours. So it doesn't make sense to, and it doesn't really have any indicator. I think I noticed it a minute late that it stopped shooting. And actually, I did notice it a minute late because this has a minute auto shut off. So, so makes no sense.
Write to the EU and tell them that this is a bunch of nonsense. They should quit this stupidness.
But even then, it would have to totally reproduce whatever part.
So this is the other thing. There's 2 ways to fix this thing. Apparently, I googled it while we were going. And so the one is you can get some external monitor you connect it to, and then record off of that. Okay, but that's requires a bunch of other equipment and blah blah blah. We have to build a whole other setup. And the second is, you can modify the firmware using some external software, but that voids your warranty. So, it's fairly expensive camera. Seems like an awful waste to me.
Yeah.
Very stupid. And
doesn't matter. We're back to the iPhone 11 Pro Max right now, so we're back to that. So if you guys have any feedback, we're quite early on. We hope that this is satisfactory for the time being. We have our microphones. The camera is pretty decent. But of course, we want to improve. If you guys have any feedback or if you have any suggestions, now early on would be the time to do it. We will listen to you. Believe me, we will take it under consideration because right now we're just working with an iPhone. We want to upgrade eventually. We want to do better. So if any of you guys has any strong idea and knowledge on how to do this, please let us know.
Especially if it's multi-camera setups, because then we can get kind of different, cool angles, zoom in, things like this, and multi-microphone.
Sure.
It turned out that getting 2 microphones, we don't know anything about this stuff, so we're just learning. And 2 microphones was a little bit challenging, but getting 3 for some reason, especially when it's wireless, is ridiculously hard.
Right.
So I don't know why it's such a disaster in today's day and age, but for whatever reason, they have this complication. So if somebody knows, hey, look, here's an optimal setup for having multiple cameras, multiple mics, making everything work together. That would be great. We would appreciate that. Minimal amount of editing, because we have somebody who edits it for us, but we don't want to add lots of hours of manually going back and forth between one and the other. That would be lame. So yeah, I feel like there should be a really easy solution here, but it seems like not. Maybe a new business idea for somebody to make this easy.
Absolutely.
It's, kind of
not something where you just search and a solution pops up.
Exactly.
Anyways, guys, don't forget to subscribe. With all that being said, me and Michael are very committed to bringing on at least one episode per week for the time being. Maybe by the time you're watching this, we have increased that. But don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Helps us out a lot. Hit the notification bell so you can be notified when an episode comes out. And without further ado,
enjoy the episode.
Yep, enjoy the episode.
Welcome back to the Solutions Podcast, everyone. We are here with episode 6. I'm Michael Rosmer.
This is Jim Pastor-Matis, and this is my first episode with no braces.
Nice. Very good. Congrats, buddy. Congrats.
Thanks.
All right. So today we're going to dive into a little bit more personal subject.
Yeah.
It is really about the subject of succeeding in the modern world. And I think the interesting thing, we can discuss it a little bit, but to me, the reason to discuss this is, we can talk about big societal problems, but it all comes down to the individual.
Yeah.
Right? Both kind of personal responsibility and the element that we have in terms of, as people do better, the world does better.
Yeah.
But also the other part, and in fact, a lot of the problems we discussed, like we had an episode on wealth and income inequality, well, this would help address that, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing I think that's important about it is, really our personal ability to be productive and be levers for change in the world is what's going to allow all these things to come about. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important that we say, hey, listen, let's deconstruct some of the aspects of success and how the modern world works today so that, we can all be more successful at making the change that we want to see.
Sure.
What do you think? Other ideas about why this is an important topic?
Well, I do think quite a lot of people turn to the internet to figure out, how can I be more productive? How can I be successful? And, and I think we should define what successful is. Now, are we going to talk specifically about financial success, or should we get into basically, all this stuff, like success in general? So, way more beyond finances.
So obviously finance is a big one. I don't think the idea is to discuss, success in health or something like that. But to me, success is about being a change agent. So that's kind of the relevant point is, aside from just, hey, having success financially, as in making money, I think there is having impact.
Absolutely.
And I just look at the difference between, it's like, hey, look, you can have tons of great intentions. You can have all kinds of good ideas. And if you can't execute on them, if you can't implement them, if you can't actually bring it into the world, it's useless. Right?
Absolutely.
This thing that goes along with it is when you go and try and bring something into the world, you very often discover, wow, the way that I thought things were in my head that sounded good in theory is not how it is in practice at all. But
also, it's, everybody has an idea. There's all these guys and girls out there that, they come out and they say, look, I thought of this idea, with Uber, with Facebook, and with this and that, but then the execution is lacking to such a degree that they're not able to make the impact that you're referring to.
Totally.
So, yeah, I guess deconstructing the entire thing and figuring out, where the missing pieces are, would definitely help.
I'll give an interesting framework that I sometimes talk about, which is what I call the execution cube. Okay, what's the execution cube all about? I came up with this idea when I was looking at why do employees not get a result. Okay, and I kind of deconstructed that. To me, there's like 4 elements of this, and then there's 2 lever points on it, which is why we have a cube. Okay, mm-hmm. 6 sides. So the first thing, basically, it's like in order for someone to achieve something, what do they need? They need the skills to do it, right? They need the resources to do it. They need the motivation to do it. And they need what I would call the organization to do it. Mm-hmm. So we can kind of dive into those, and then basically the
organization could fall under skills, though, couldn't it?
No. So what I mean by organization is often there's, say, resources. Just imagine you're in a company, and you're like, hey, we have all the files that our employees need in the computer, but they don't know where those files are.
Yeah.
So they're not organized in a way that I can find them, right? Another example of organization is the clarity of, hey, what is it that needs to be done? It's all great to say, hey, listen, the person has the resources, they have the skills, they have this, but they just don't know what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's an organizational problem. So the clarity around that, and then the last part of it is kind of the alignment between team members. You can have two people who are working against each other. You can have somebody who is going and doing the same things, they're duplicating, et cetera, et cetera. So these are 4 different types of problems that you can have, and you can kind of dissect what's going on. Why do I bring that up? I bring that up a little bit because of the fact that as we look at solutions we're talking about, right, it may be that you say, hey, listen, for me to do this, I need more resources.
Yeah.
And I do think that there is a bias towards lack of resources. Like, it's really easy for people to be like, oh, the problem with schooling is we don't have enough funding. I personally think it's bullshit. I think it's a lazy way to go. The defining factor is rarely resources, usually resourcefulness. But that being said, there is definitely a resources constraint, right? So, that's part of it. And so we have to say, okay, how do we get those resources? That's part of the financial success we can talk about here today. But then there's, okay, how do you motivate people, right? How do you engage with people? Like, the interpersonal skills are super important, right? Then you've got, okay, how do you communicate with people in order to
While you go at it, I want to pull up a post that could be useful here to the conversation. So keep going.
Yeah, so then there's, how do we, what kind of coordination mechanisms do we have between people to make sure that our communication, et cetera, is effective so we're going in the right direction, right? And then, of course, how do we get people the skills? And skills is really interesting. So I separate skills from knowledge.
Yep.
To me, you can go and read a book about swimming and have a lot of knowledge about it. Unless you've gotten in the water and swam, you have no skills in swimming. The thing that goes along with that is there's like internal and external skills. There are emotional and there are physical skills. There's a broad range of skills. So skills could be, like, emotional mastery is a skill. Right?
Absolutely. Most definitely.
And one of the things that I find really interesting is I talk to people quite often, because my wife and I were talking about this the other day, about how...
I pulled it up.
Awesome. So my brother will say sometimes, he's like, hey, listen, he'll evaluate or, kind of judge people based on their level of ambition. And there is something to be said for the fact that some people just lack ambition, right? They're just playing a small game. I don't think that's necessarily good. But more often than not, people who have high ambitions have zero delivery, zero follow-through, right? And so most people, their failure is day-to-day, not in terms of the big picture. The big picture is comparatively pretty easy, I think, most of the time. Doing it every day, like the discipline of, hey, you get up on time, you don't get distracted, you stay focused.
The consistent time allocation as well on the day-to-day.
Exactly.
Like I think on another.
Jim's very good at that, by the way.
Well, thank you. No, on another episode, I was telling you how a lot of my friends that come, from high school and from home, they come here, they see the place I live in, and are like, oh man, that's crazy, you're a genius and this and that, and when we go deep into the conversation, I tell them, look, how did I spend the past 12 years?
Yep.
And it goes back into what you said, right? The consistency of those 12 years.
Yep.
I mean, it's not that I'm an Einstein, it's that I allocated my time, I spent my time so differently over the past 12 years that it compounded, and I was able to use that to my advantage, and now, here I am, compared to a person that, is either spending their time just watching movies, clubbing, doing whatever else. Well, basically, and that's kind of an, egotistic thing too. It's like you're spending all this time on your personal life, but you're not putting anything, for the long term. But then you have like some false expectation that things should come to you. It doesn't work that way, right? So
I think
time allocation is super important.
Super important.
Especially consistently, like you said.
Especially since, look, ultimately we all have the same time. Like, that is the one thing that we're on pretty level playing fields on, right? Somebody else might be born into a family with a lot of wealth. Somebody else might be born into a part of the world that they have big disadvantages. Somebody else might be born with lower IQ, or, they might be born into a family that's not supportive. Or there's lots of different ways that we can be different. But But what we are all same on is we have the same 24 hours in a day. So,
and it's 4 a.m. and we're shooting this podcast. We could say, look, we're not going to do this. We're going to do this another day. But hey,
true. But
we're going to use as much time, any time that we can, right? And we make these things work at this point every Friday. So, right, like we try to find the common time, and if we don't get it going exactly that hour, we're still going to get it going. Like we were talking about earlier today, building the discipline on this new thing that we're doing, which is the podcast.
Yep.
So consistency.
Absolutely. So maybe to like frame some of this conversation, we can pull back. I think there's, at least for me, whatever you want to cover as well, but for me, I think there's kind of 3 topics that are interesting to look at. One is, what do you see as kind of factors and process of success, right? Second is, why do people fail? Which, those two are related. And the third, I think, that's really interesting to me is, how has the world changed so that these are different than they used to be? Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of people who maybe worked really well in the past that, doesn't necessarily work nearly as well today. And at the same token, the potential we have today is vastly greater than it ever was in the past before. And so that's a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't you go ahead, kick us off on.
So I wanted to. So I pulled up this post here. So this is in one of the groups that I'm a part of. Somebody asked, "What is the most underrated leadership quality?" Mm-hmm. Right, and a bunch of people give their suggestions. So I just wanted to go through them,
Great.
and see if those can help the conversation.
Yep.
Okay, so I obviously don't want to say anything silly because there are trolls everywhere. So one lady here suggests positivity. It's an underrated leadership quality. What do you think about that? Positivity, being positive.
I don't. My initial response is I'm very anti the positive vibes only type movement.
Right.
There's the famous book by, I think, is it Andy Grove, who wrote Only the Paranoid Survive. He was the CEO of Intel. Maybe it was not him. Maybe it was the guy who came after him. Anyway, whatever. One of these guys. So, yes and no.
It's important to be positive because it helps with your overall productivity. But at the end of the day, even when you're not positive, you still have to show up. And
but the way that I would dissect it is this: it's like, look, you have to believe. And this is maybe Tony Robbins has like some 3 things, and 2 of them kind of fit into this. The one is like, as a good leader, you need to be able to see the world as it is. Because if you're delusional about how the world is, that's not good, right? But you also need to be able to see it as better than it is, because that's what's going to like drive you there, right?
Sure.
So I think these 2 things, how it is might be fucking negative in a lot of regards, right? Now you want to appreciate what's good about it, of course. So there's always positive and negative and everything, and so great. But you want to be able to see, hey, look at how it could be better, which is you have to be positive in that regard.
Elon is pretty good at that.
Absolutely. But then he also has the opposite side, which is he's afraid of what it could be, right? So you kind of have this.
True.
Both ways. The other thing that I think on that side is positivity, most of the time interpersonally, is better, right? Like, who wants to be around a negative nanny?
For sure.
So,
on any level of the, of the hierarchy, right?
Absolutely. It's nice to be around. So if your energy lifts people up, that's a good thing. Now, I do think there can be an especially kind of in the modern Western culture, an overemphasis on being positive to people when somebody's screwing up. You need to be able to be like, look, this is fucking shit. This is like, it's totally unacceptable. It's like Steve Jobs would throw temper tantrums, right? Like, great. So that would be my view on positivity. So
cool. No, and I've
agreed,
agreed.
Yeah.
Totally agreed. Yes.
All right, cool. Next one.
Humility.
Humility, interesting. What do you think about that one?
If life ain't humbled, you yet in some for another. Wait, this is not even properly written. Well, I mean, I know lots of people that lack humility and are, still good leaders. I'm not sure if it's a necessary leadership trait or quality, but most leaders that I recognize, they definitely have humility.
Donald Trump.
Right.
Very humble, very humble. I had some good friends. We used to sit there and it'd be like, you know, if somebody was like saying good things about themselves, it'd be like, you know, I'm good at this and this. Is like, and humble. It's like,
right.
yeah, very
right.
humble.
No, I think it's important, but whether or not it's necessary for a leader, I don't know. There's quite a lot of guys and gals out there that do it with little to no humility. I'm personally not for those people. I definitely value humility.
Wait, so when you say humility, what do you mean? Define it for me.
Okay, well, so basically, look. Okay, yes, you know you're doing amazing. You're probably amazing at something, you know, but I don't know. Like, don't show it off in the wrong, you know, spotlight. You know, like, be a little. What's the word? I don't know the word I'm trying to use here.
Gracious or?
Well, I'm not even sure if gracious would describe it well.
Don't be a douche?
Well, I think that would be sufficient. You know, it's like you don't have to be a douche, right? Like,
see,
what about you?
Well, so this is, I think, a really great example of where, in my opinion, to some extent it has changed. And I think, like, a lot of what will get thrown out about success and leadership and things like this, I think it goes both ways, right? Because, so for instance, if I have a fault, it's that I'm too humble, right? I'm joking. But what I mean by that is, like, I'm not a good self-promoter, and that hurts me.
Yeah.
Like, as a leader, as in success, etc., like, you need to be able to self-promote. You need.
Sure.
If I look back to one of the earliest examples of somebody who was undeniably successful, you have Alexander the Great. And one of the things that Alexander the Great was one of the first people to do was use propaganda. He would, like, commission, you know, sculptures and paintings of himself in, like, these, like, godlike things, right? That made him. Is that humility? No, it's not.
Definitely
but it was
not.
effective, right? So I think, to me, humility as it's relevant to leadership, etc., is it's usually, I wouldn't even say that this is always the case, but it's usually true that it's not good to make other people feel less. So that's one thing.
So that's more of where I was trying to get to.
Okay. Yeah. So, you know, like, being condescending and stuff, usually not effective. There are some rare exceptions to that. I tend to believe that there's a tool for every task and there's a task for every tool. So a big part of the success journey, the success algorithm or whatever, is understanding and being able to read the situation to know which tool to pull out at which situation.
Sure.
Right? And there are some cases, like, the classic example to me is when the person is being the douche who's, like, all high on themselves. That's the type of time when I want to quietly show them up.
Right.
Because I'm just like, come on, guys.
No, it's the same for everybody.
Yeah. So
Same for everybody.
But I think the real humility is realizing this too shall pass. So when you're at that height, when things are going great, it's good to celebrate, it's good to be grateful, etc. But to realize that, hey, listen, this too shall pass. You know, that line is from The Greatest Salesman in the World. It's or The World's Greatest Salesman, however you pronounce it, whatever the name of the book is. And I think, like, when things are down, this too shall pass. When things are up, this too shall pass. Like, you should not get too high on your horse when things are going well, right? It's the idea of pride go before the fall, right?
So would you agree that then humility is an underrated leadership quality?
I guess it depends on what circle, whether it's underrated. My mom, it's like probably the first thing she'd tell you. So for her, it's not underrated. You know? So it's, I think, so I guess, again, kind of going to that last subject of the change too. Okay, so I'll bring this in. Humility is not a very good way to get attention. And in the modern day, a big part of the currency that you can succeed with is attention. So this is a big, big change that has happened, I would say, primarily in the last 20 or so years.
How do you think it serves Elon Musk? And I mean, that's a very successful guy who I think is quite humble.
Yeah. Is Elon Musk humble?
Quite humble, I would say. He, especially compared to...
I think that part of what makes him is that he tends to be quite likable. in terms of his way of communicating, right? So he comes across as this kind of, he's got this charming geekiness, a little bit awkward sort of approach that works really well for him. Yeah, and so I think in that sense, like I think about one of the best presenters ever was Steve Jobs, right? And if you watch the difference between Donald Trump promoting and Steve Jobs promoting, I think Steve Jobs was a better promoter than Donald Trump, but Steve Jobs had like almost the ideal balance where he could go up before an audience and he could be like, hey, you know, we came up with Mobile Me, not our finest hour, you know? And that's like a sense of humility, right? But then what he would do is he would counterbalance it and be like, you know, and now we've gone out and we've built what a lot of people say is, you know, the greatest phone in the world.
Yeah.
And so if you're so humble, quote unquote, that you can't admit that we built the greatest phone in the world, that's going to hurt you. Like, the fact that he communicates that is important.
Sure.
And today, like, I just come back to this thing. Look, Donald Trump is not a humble guy. Okay, he's not.
I don't know. Some people would say he is.
He's, you know, knows humility better than anyone. I know. But he's successful. And most of Donald Trump, or I don't know most, but a lot of Donald Trump's success comes from what he's good at is getting attention. Like, you have to think, this guy is a guy who's good enough at getting attention to become the president with an inferior budget to his competitors by quite dramatic margin when his own party is against him, right? This is quite an outstanding task. Like, it's pretty difficult, whether you like Donald Trump or not.
I would give quite a bit of credit to his marketing team also. Sure. When we talk about budgets and how much exposure he got. Okay.
Absolutely. But also, you can just look at what he was able to do with Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Like, Twitter, you know, I remember seeing some interview way back in the day. They were like, hey, you have like 15 million followers. He's like, yeah, it's like owning the New York Times without the losses, you know? And it's true, right? So the whole point is that in the modern day, you just have to look at, this is, like, to me, I'm really interested over the last maybe year or so in what I call the new rules of success. I wrote a Facebook post about it a while back, and I've done a couple of interviews with people where I've talked about it. And one of the things that's interesting to me is a lot of what used to be true is not that true anymore. And one of the examples of this is the value of products and services has fallen quite dramatically due to global competition, etc. But the thing, and so this is kind of like abundance economics, right? There's just like a lot more of stuff out there. And so that which is abundant tends to become worth less, and that which is scarce tends to be more valuable. Well, what is it that there's always a premium on? Is attention. Yeah. Like, there's more and more people fighting for your attention because you have a limited amount of it. So the people who can get attention, that's hyper valuable. And so
that's a good point. And I mean, with such a short attention span, if you're going to be humble about it, you're likely not going to get attention.
Exactly.
Makes
so,
sense.
And this, like, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, right? But it's a reality in the world today that if you want to be successful, the ability to get people's attention is really important. And sometimes coming across as a flagrant, arrogant asshole can be helpful. If you look at somebody like Simon Cowell he isn't like this really so much anymore, but when they started American Idol, I mean, he was an asshole, right? And this was part of what got him attention. Same with Kevin O'Leary.
I don't know much about it, but yes.
Okay, yeah, Kevin O'Leary, same thing.
Kevin, I do.
Yeah, he was well known for being kind of the dick, right? And
even now in Shark Tank, he's Mr. Wonderful.
Yeah, but he tries to brand himself as.
Right, no, and he's wonderful. I love Kevin, but yeah, people usually view him as the asshole because he usually speaks his mind and he's very upfront.
Yeah, so the whole point is that kind of stuff, like, if you want to bring in change, I think that probably humility is not the strongest characteristic there.
Fair enough. Oh, well, I already read the next one, is listening. Having the ability to listen. I think I even did a post on my Facebook wall about being an impeccable listener, how helpful it is, and that being a leadership trait that's rather not often talked about. Yeah, I would definitely agree that it's, well, like I said in my Facebook post, not often talked about. Like, people don't talk about how important it is listening. Not like on every single level of life, like in your marriage, in your relationship, in your personal life, in business, like when you're business partners with someone, with your employees. Like it definitely is a very, very important trait. That, I mean, you know, the two different levels here are, you know, the guy that's listening, communicating with his employees and having a good relationship and all that type of stuff. And, you know, lots of people always make example of the asshole boss who never listens, never communicates with his employees, and generally that turns to poorer quality work environment. And I mean, you can argue the same for anything in your personal life too. If you're not listening to your wife, I would bet you would not have a very happy relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think listening, it's interesting because years ago, I remember when I first started reading about leadership, I read the summary of some book, and one of the things that stood out to me to this day is they said, you know, a lot of people think that leaders it's like give directions, but actually, if you study leaders, the best leaders tend to ask a lot of questions, and questioning is often a much more effective process than telling. And so, yeah, I think that probably is a great example of one that is underrated.
Great.
What else have we got? Some trolls.
Yeah. Non-terrible breath. Okay, I just want to talk about something because they list so many, and I think some are not worth talking about so much.
Okay.
Well, the gentleman here says communication, and I think that goes hand in hand with listening, right? So
one of the things I remember thinking a while back that I've noticed that in a lot of fields of life, aggression corresponds highly to success.
Aggression.
Aggression. Just like the person who's going to push harder, whether it's put in more hours, work hard, like just like that push, right? The person who pushes, in most cases, is going to succeed above the person who doesn't. Except with people. Except in relationships. In relationships, that backfires. It's exactly the opposite. If you're aggressive with people, most of the time, over time, that breaks down.
What is aggressive?
Aggressive is pushing, you know? So it's kind of like if you think about in a relationship with a girl, if you come on too heavy, that tends to work against you.
Sure.
So that's where it doesn't. And so I was kind of trying to think about it after that, because I was noticing that in so many areas of life, like I could just outwork somebody, right? Something that my brother would talk about. My brother was like, hey, look, earlier on in his life, he was struggling quite a bit, and he kind of came to the realization that he's like, hey, look, I might not be more naturally talented than this person, I might not be whatever, but what I can do is I can outwork them. And the payoff of outworking somebody else is tremendous. It is very, very big thing. So although I think that grind can be overrated, the reality is that it's a big thing. Like, to succeed without it is really tough.
Agreed.
But with people, I think that's the opposite. I think that, you know, you call that person 20 more times, not better, you know. Right. You go and so I was thinking, like, okay, like, what is it with people when you're dealing with people? And again, this is, I think, a big difference between modern success and success maybe 100 years ago. Is success today is much more interpersonal, right? People skills are just hypercritical.
Absolutely.
And to me, the key defining, if I was to like nail down one thing in that, it would be understanding, right? The quality of being understanding. And so you're going to seek understanding. It's kind of the famous Stephen Covey line, seek first to understand, then to be understood, right? And if you just are understanding, that has an enormous payoff with people in relationships. It'll make you able to influence them better. It will make you more likable. It will make you be able to kind of adapt to what's going on and reconcile things, to negotiate, to on and on and on. It's a very big thing, and that, you know, comes from listening, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Listening and getting curious, I guess.
I 1000% agree with you so far on everything said. What do you think about over-communication? Not just communication, over-communication.
You can certainly over-communicate. Absolutely, you can. I can be bad for that. 20-minute voice messages or something to employees.
They're quite to employees. Funny. Sometimes he sends me like this slew of, oh man, now they're like 5, 20, 35, and like they all add up. I tell my girlfriend like, all right, I have to listen to an hour of this guy. So, by the way, before we move forward, I would like to invite you guys to tell us your thoughts on this. What do you think are some underrated leadership qualities? Let us know down in the comments.
Absolutely.
We will definitely be doing more episodes. That doesn't mean that because we did an episode on this now that we're not going to do another one in the future. There will be follow-up episodes, and we will be looking at the comment sections quite a bit to get additional context, get additional ideas.
Refresh.
So comment down below, smash the subscribe button.
Yeah, smash the subscribe button and the like button.
Yes.
The notification bell.
Absolutely. Okay. So, all right. So we're
continuing on these
continuing
underrated leadership qualities.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of people talking about breath.
A few moments later.
Okay, sorry guys, our camera just cut out. The Canon 6D Mark II. We'll be giving our review in the future. Anyway, back.
Sure.
Off we go. You were telling us the list here.
Yeah. So I was saying that over here, a lot of people talk about breath, having a bad breath, good breath. I don't know. Like I don't.
They
think
don't work
this
from
is,
home, obviously.
Right. So another one that's brought up here is honesty. Whether you should be honest.
Yep.
And so as a leader, should you be honest?
I mean, what do you mean by honesty?
We would have to ask the person.
Okay, but from our perspective.
Okay, so do you think that a leader should be honest enough to an employee to tell them, look, this is a piece of shit?
Yeah.
You're not doing well enough. Your performance is low. Like there's like honest, genuine feedback. Now, a lot of people will say, well, you can be genuine. You don't have to say what I just said.
Yeah.
But being honest enough to, from the very beginning, go up to them, make sure you're on the same page, and, honestly tell them, how they're doing.
Yeah, so I think before the video cut out, you'd kind of mentioned that, hey, listen, you feel like in business that typically pays off, and in personal, sometimes people, don't so much want to hear about that.
Yes, I was saying that.
I think that we should separate out maybe a few different things. So, first of all, there is some truth to be said with, my mom would always tell me growing up was, speak the truth in love.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of but there's also something to be said for sometimes being direct is effective, right? Just being direct. So let's separate out. We have honesty, which we can define and play with. We have being ethical, right? Which I think is also worth addressing here. And then the third part is the one that I would say people don't talk so much about, but is probably much more important. And that's the process around how we get there. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in my estimation, the problem with anything interpersonal, and when we're talking about honesty, we're really talking about being interpersonal, is that there isn't a clear path from A to B, because people and life and feelings which you're navigating and perceptions are messy, right? So when I communicate something, how somebody else receives it isn't fixed, right? There is no like, oh, if you say this thing, it's going to be the right thing.
Makes sense.
What you have to do is you have to kind of like navigate and jig this. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to read the situation. You say, hey, listen, I want to get from point A to point B. Now, if you just think about it like driving or something, right? The traffic is going to be going all over. So do you just stay in the same lane all the time? No, that would be dumb, right? You adjust based on what's going on. And I think that's a very important skill. So there are times when being direct and not couching your words, etc., is effective. Even culturally, there's a difference, right? Like if you're in some part of Asia where they're big on saving face, then what's appropriate and effective is probably not the same as if you're in Eastern Europe where they're much more like that. I remember I was dealing with some people from Ukraine when I was living in Canada, and I had my recruiting company at the time, and I was talking to one of them. She was an accountant, and so she was like, hey, can you like tell me how I did. And in Canada, it's like you have the sandwich technique of like you say something good, then you say something critical, then you end with something good, this kind of thing, right? And so I'm like, well, I think you did well on this. And she's like, can you just cut it out and just tell me like what's wrong? It's like, and so there is some effectiveness to that, but you have to be able to read that environment. And the only way you read that environment is by getting in the game, playing it, testing some things. I think that people can tend to be too, like almost weak in this regard. And I think other times people can tend to be too harsh in this regard. And so, yeah, I think that it's really like and even like, you're a marketer, okay? So let's talk about honesty in marketing, right?
Well, I think it's critical. Now, look, if you're gonna be too honest, you can't really manipulate anyone. But I think you're walking a fine line.
It's a very fine line.
Yeah, where you can make things misleading.
Yep.
Or you will still say what's about that product or service.
Yep.
And try to mention it in a way that sounds.
Let's look at some examples of honesty. Again, looking at Trump. Okay. Trump is very known for being fact-checked, to have a lot of inaccuracies in what he's saying. Now, I think I was watching an interview with somebody, was it Michael Malice or was it the creator of Dilbert? I can't remember. Anyway, somebody. And they were mentioning that Trump tends to be directionally accurate. Okay?
Directionally accurate?
Directionally accurate. So he'll be like, it's the biggest crowd ever. They're like, what it really means is there was a big crowd, right? And they're like, there's a different, but they were, some people will say, well, this is gaslighting, this is, Trump does that sort of thing. Yeah. But what they're expressing is, and it's even in one of Trump's books, I believe, somebody mentioned, it's like he talks about like honest hyperbole or something as an effective promotion tool, right? So it's like, are you accurate? No, you're not accurate. But you're not totally off base on it. Like you're not saying, hey, listen, it's not like this is trash and you're saying it's great. It's like this person is great and you're saying they're the best. They're unbelievable. They're the best ever. This is possibly the best cabinet that has ever been put together in the history of cabinets.
Right.
That's like the Trump. So is that honest?
Yeah.
So it's directionally accurate, meaning, hey, it's good, but it doesn't accurately express what's going on. I try to be quite accurate.
Tested more positive for the virus than anyone has ever seen.
Exactly, right? And so you've got these types of things that are pretty like, it's not exactly clear, I don't think. And I don't think that there's necessarily a one size fits all. Like the truth is, to some extent, for sure, that works for him, Does it work for him 100%? No. I mean, he certainly gets backlash on it.
Is there anything that works 100%?
Exactly, and that's my point, right? My point is, this comes to that reading things, right? You kind of have to be able to read the people, read the situation, etc. Again, I would go back to the example of Steve Jobs, where I think Steve Jobs was much more effective than Trump is. Because Trump, when he comes in there, it's just so obviously and so over the top that you just kind of can't believe it, right? Whereas Steve was good enough to be able, he would like admit a weakness, right? And then counterbalance it with a truth. And because he admitted the weakness, you're more likely to believe the truth, right? And then maybe he's directionally accurate on the truth, but not totally. And then he would communicate it in such a way, like he wouldn't be like, it's this way. He'd be like, many people say, or some people say, etc., which again is accurate, right? But kind of gives, like, it's a very effective communication strategy.
But there's also, the honesty that people could mean here is also dragging on a relationship, whether it is business or personal. But I guess in this setting right now it would be business. So lots of people, for example, that hire somebody, and this is when I say lots of people, this is mostly small business owners. This isn't anything that usually doesn't pass in businesses that have 1,000 or thousands of employees. And decent management. But there's this emotional attachment that begins to form between the employer and the employee, and like they become buddies. And there's lack of honesty on whether the task is delivered well, whether the job is well done, and when the business could be better served, by the employer being honest, he's not. Or maybe the relationship isn't working out, and the employer should cut that out and be honest. Like that type of thing.
This is what I would say. And this goes back to, again, the thing that I think people don't talk about. In my opinion, you can't situationally say, hey, listen, be this way or don't be this way.
Yeah.
I think what you can say, almost definitively, is that it's highly effective to build an environment where you can be honest. Mm-hmm. So I used to find this with employees. I still do it to some extent, but it's quite a lot of work, which is when I would hire somebody new, I would tell them, I'd be like, hey, listen, this is an environment where you can be totally free to be completely honest with me. If there's some problem, I want to know about it.
Yeah.
Give me criticism, and it won't be an issue. I can tell you almost nobody will actually do that. Almost nobody. Why not? Because they're used to being in an environment where if you're honest, you get fired. It's not safe, to be honest. Like the most important part, and this is probably more important than honesty, honestly, is creating an environment where it's safe to be honest. I think as a leader, I think it's more valuable for it to be safe to be honest than it is to be honest. Now, being honest is part of that. I certainly don't think that you should be out there lying, etc., typically, although the truth is that sometimes, this is an unpleasant truth. The reality is lies sometimes are effective. That's the reality, right?
You condition people in that environment, right?
Exactly.
Because even if you've built that environment, somebody that comes in and they're new,
Exactly. So what I would do is each month I would do a review with them, right? I would sit down with them or get them on the phone or whatever, and I'd say, okay, great. What's working? What's not working? What would you like to see improve? What are the things and at first, it's very unsafe for them to do that because they're worried, now, once in a while you get somebody who came in who they just have it in their personality, they have the kind of the personal confidence, whatever, but that's rare. And so what would happen is I would give them subtly honest feedback, right? I would deliver feedback that was looking at something not too harsh and communicated in a way that was fairly soft, right? Okay. So it can feel safe for them to receive that. And I would get them to do it to me too, right? And no matter what they communicated, I think very, very important, this is that part of creating the environment of honesty, would be, thank you for sharing. That's it. You should not defend, you should not whatever. All you should do is thank the person. It's just, and then the next month, I would amp it up a little bit, right? I would go and I would give a little bit more direct feedback, right? And I would get a little bit more direct feedback from them. After about 6 months, you can just say whatever. Because you've built up this safety and trust with each other that it's not going to get in the way. In order to make that work, you have to not be personally attached to it, right? If you're somebody, I had a friend and business partner who, he was very big on honesty and direct and all this kind of stuff. But then when I watched him in practice, as we started doing business together, what I would see is it was not safe to be honest around him, right? Basically, if you were honest with him, he'd get upset and attack you. Right. It's then he would be upset that people went behind his back and gossiped and things. It's look, you have a gossip problem because you are the gossip problem, not them. If it was just safe to be upfront and honest about it, it'd be no issue.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is probably much more underrated. In general, the idea of you build relationships over time, you build culture over time, and working hard to foment that type of environment is really important and really under-talked about.
You want to hear more of this? Smash that like button.
There you go. Share it with your friends, get some subscribers for us. We appreciate it.
Yes.
All right. So what's after, before we go on about this, what about ethical?
Being ethical?
Yeah.
What's the question? Is that important? Is that underrated?
Yeah. Is it important and or underrated in leadership?
I think it is important to be ethical.
Yep. So talk me through it. I want to hear.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where, there's, sure, you could bring up examples, but I don't know. People could just generally say, it's safe to say that, look, being ethical should be a standard across the board.
Okay, that's the politically correct answer.
Politically correct or not, look, not being ethical. Now, let's just stick this to business, yeah? So we're kind of talking, where's that going to get you?
Well, I mean, have you seen people who have had payoffs from not being ethical? I certainly have. I've seen people who they are basically con artists. They're ripping people off. There's Ponzi schemes. There's, abusing investors, etc. And they walk away with millions of dollars. And
That's
somebody
not
else.
leadership.
I mean, it was effective in terms of getting them to that goal.
Yeah, sure. It was effective for them to make money, but that I don't think that was effective for them becoming leaders in any space. They're just.
I mean, is it an effective thing to being leaders with? I'm going to get myself into trouble with talking about this, but I think it's worth challenging.
Yeah.
So, like, they probably have a circle of people who they were effective. Like, think about the mafia or the mob or something, right? Are they ethical? Well, I mean, they're
No.
in the business of crime. But was the Godfather a good leader within his circle? Probably.
Yeah, but generally speaking, you're saying, look, you're saying within his circle. But I think generally when we talk about leaders, we're talking about much broader figures than those circles. Like,
Are you really?
well, I mean, you certainly could be.
You certainly could be. Yep.
When
Okay, so let's look at some other examples. Is Vladimir Putin ethical?
that's highly questionable.
Is he an effective leader? I think he's probably one of the most effective in the world.
Probably, but I would then argue that most people in politics are not ethical.
Okay, but apparently they've gotten some success in that regard. A lot of
But
people would
where
probably
does that get
argue
you
that
in business? Where does that get you in business when you're just getting started? For the average person, they're just getting whatever their idea going. Where will that get them being unethical?
I mean, look, I've dealt lots with affiliate marketers who have done all kinds of shady shit. Seriously, right? Like, let's
So have I, yeah.
let's be real here. People have gone, and it's very effective for them to come in to run some sort of black hat campaign where they're basically ripping off somebody else's brand, using a celebrity image, doing something like that that is, you could easily argue it's unethical, right? They make millions of dollars off of it, and it allows them, first of all, they build good reputation with the affiliate networks and other people that they're working with, right? They probably have some people who they're working with who also win in that, and what they're able to do, they're able to parlay it into the next success.
Yeah, but I don't know. I guess then we're going back to, is it effective rather than is it an underrated leadership quality? I mean, it is effective. Apparently, from this conversation that we're having, yes, it is effective. Being, not being ethical in whatever, either in politics or in business.
So,
I know a bunch of those affiliates you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, you can make easy money when you're impersonating Dwayne Johnson or whoever. I even saw one impersonating Elon Musk.
Yep.
And promoting
Tony
some
Robbins,
product.
whoever, yeah.
Now, this one was quite a sophisticated funnel. They actually had a whole video presentation that was completely fake that they made specifically for
I've
for
seen
that
something
product.
kind of like that. Yeah.
And I mean, that's terrible, let alone not ethical. But they made a lot of money. But I don't think, like, if the question is it an underrated leadership quality?
Well, whether it's, is it a necessary leadership quality? Is it an important leadership quality?
I think it is.
But we've just given a bunch of examples of apparently successful leaders who
Successful
don't,
leaders, who? The affiliates that fucking rip off?
Vladimir Putin. Like, I think it's very hard to argue that Vladimir Putin is not a successful leader.
He is a successful leader. No, I can't. And sure. But I don't know if he answers for the average person in the average business that they're trying to start.
I mean, I think the average business, we just talked about all kinds of people who have had a decent payoff. So I have an answer to this, right? But I think it's worth playing with it. Like, I think that this is the type of conversation, I wanted to bring it up because I think it's the type of thing that most people, it's like you need to play with it with kids' gloves, right? Heaven forbid that you could possibly say that there was a payoff to being unethical. The reality is there are payoffs to being unethical.
Sure.
That it is
agree.
a tremendously, like, it's just the reality. If you go and you look at the history of many, many successful people, often when they got started, early on especially, they were doing some things that were, pretty questionable. There's a famous line within Microsoft when they were working on DOS They were competing there with, let me see if I can get this right. I believe it was Lotus 123 was competing with Excel. And the line inside Microsoft was, DOS isn't done until Lotus won't run. And they were basically making it so that we'd kill their competitor's product. Is that ethical? I don't think that's ethical, personally. So you have examples of this sort of thing that have worked out quite well. To me, when I look at it, I kind of take, I think like the most macro effective way to look at it is from a game theory standpoint. And if you look at a game theory standpoint, they've run all kinds of simulations. And generally speaking, tit for tat, where you start out treating people well, is good. But then you reciprocate what they do. This is the winning strategy. So basically, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to treat you well. Okay? If you treat me well, I'm going to keep treating you well. If you treat me badly, I'm going to fuck you. No, seriously.
I understand. I get it.
So this is a win. When they did all sorts of simulations with all kinds of different professors' strategies and stuff, this strategy beat them all. Okay? There was 2 ways they were able to improve on this strategy. The first one was every once in a while, forgiving. Okay? So most of the time, I'm going to treat you well if you treat me well. If you fuck me, I'm going to fuck you. But then every once in a while, being willing to forgive the person when they treat you badly. That improved the strategy. Because otherwise, how do you get out of this cycle, right? Somebody has to break that pattern.
Yeah.
The other way that they were able to improve on this strategy was when you notice somebody repeatedly treats you well, you once in a while take advantage of them. That was the winning strategy. I think, again, that's something that probably people don't necessarily want to hear, but I think it fits within the context of a relationship. I think that if you want to be successful, if you want big success, relationships are a big part of it. Relationships come highly from playing win-win. You have to play win-win with people. You also need to put yourself in a position where your downside of what it is that you're going to do is not significant, right? So although you could get lucky, you could say, hey, listen, I'm going to come through and I'm going to rob a bank and I may get away with it, right? This is possible. If you repeatedly rob banks, that's going to tend to get you into trouble. So generally, robbing a bank at all is not a good strategy, right? Because the downside of that is too high, right? So what you want to do is you're willing to play close to the line on things that aren't serious. But on things that are serious, you're not going to play close to the line, generally. That's what I tend to think. What do you think about that?
No, look, you've definitely brought a very interesting perspective here to the conversation. I get what you're saying about ethics, about how it works out, sometimes, and how I can't sit here and tell you that everything I've done in my life has been fully ethical, and I think neither can you or anybody in the world. That unless you're a nun or a monk or something like that.
Maybe even them.
Right. No, but I don't know. I wanted to say that for the average person that's starting a business, would that be something advisable, right? Would that be something where you would say, look, you shouldn't be afraid to fuck somebody over. And you're saying, look, well, play tit for tat, right? If you see that.
What I would tell people starting over. So this is what the advice that I would give based on my experience in real life. Okay, again, not in some game, not in whatever, but in real life, is that early on, playing the gray zone is where most of the success comes. It's very hard to play 100% white and have a big advantage when you're starting out. It's just
I can probably agree there. Yeah. I can probably agree
a simple example is just, hey, listen, are you going to follow all of Facebook's ad policies? It's when you're starting out, okay, if you're a big brand,
you follow them and they still ban you. So
sure, yeah, and so there are going to be things that you're going to do that is it illegal? No, you're not crossing the line. And that's why I'm kind of saying
sure.
But you're not crossing the line into being illegal, right? But are you finding loopholes? Yeah, you better be finding loopholes. Because the loopholes are the things that at a small scale you can get away with that at a large scale big organizations can't get away with. And maybe there's different ways that you can go and you can get your costs down that somebody else just can't because they don't work at scale, right? Maybe you can negotiate a deal with somebody when you're, say, doing real estate deals, that you're buying a house at substantially lower by using some pretty aggressive negotiation tactics, right? Well, when you're starting out, you don't have a lot of resources. You need to get the best deal possible. That's the reality.
And that's not always ethical.
Yeah, I mean, there's a spectrum of ethicalness, right? Like, if you listen to Nassim Taleb, what he talks about often as like what is ethics, he'll say, okay, risk transference to the other party, right? Basically, you're taking the risk off of you and transferring it to the other. So by his definition, investment bankers and all these guys are not ethical, right? The whole nature of their business is built on not being ethical. They're taking none of the risk, they're taking all the upside, or they're taking a portion of the upside.
But if you're known as being unethical across the board, are you trustworthy? Don't you think those go hand to hand?
Yeah, so generally speaking, I think that you need to be reliable and trustworthy and things like this, right? So that's why I'm saying, like, you know, if you were to look at Vladimir Putin, is Vladimir Putin going to typically screw over the people in his inner circle? I don't think so. If you screw him over, he probably will, right? But generally speaking, like, he has to build loyalty. And you don't build loyalty based on screwing over the people around you. Likewise, if you want to build a successful brand, you can't do it on screwing your customers over, right? So it's important, like, doing a good job for your customers tends to be a good thing over the long period of time. Doing a good job for your employees tends to be a good thing over time. Doing a good job for your partners, there is a lot to be said for, like, win-win. Other people win when they play with you, right? If you can make it so that other people consistently win when they play with you, that's going to have a compounding effect, which is tremendously positive. The way that you get there is certainly not necessarily playing within the box, right? Like I said, that's the gray zone. That's the, like, okay, you're going to find some ways that you're going to go around the rules. You're going to circumvent things. You're going to whatever in order to give you some sort of an advantage so that you can get ahead. And
which is not always unethical, though.
Yeah, that's why I said, like, okay, you can get into the question of unethical, right? Like a good example of unethical is if you have asymmetric information about a deal with somebody else. And I've actually had this in a real situation. So basically, there was a situation with a business partner and I where we had gotten into this deal that there was some risk involved in it, right? And so I remember he and I talking, and we were like, okay, how do we deal with this? We're not comfortable with it. So we were working on getting ourselves out of that deal, okay? And we were trying to do that with the person who we had the deal with, and ultimately that was what ended up happening. We got out of it with that person, and that was fine. But the backup plan was, all right, can we transfer this off to somebody else?
Yeah.
Somebody else would be interested in this. Can we let them come in and take it over? Now, there's the asymmetric information part here is you say, okay, great. In order for me to be able to sell this, what I've got, off to them, if I tell them what I know about the risk, they're much less likely to buy it.
Sure.
So is it ethical for me to withhold that information from them?
No.
There you go. So in that situation, I remember very distinctly having the conversation with him. I was like, listen, you're my partner. My top priority is to protect you. And if it means that I protect you over protecting this other person, I'm willing to do that. Is that ethical? You know, I can see where the argument that it's not ethical, right? I'm certainly giving, now again, we didn't go down that road, so it didn't matter, right? We were able to resolve it otherwise. But I think you get into situations like that where it's like, okay, asymmetric information gives you an advantage. And if you have asymmetric information, if it's not ethical to share that information with the other party, you lose the advantage pretty much, right? You can go into all sorts of research about an investment and you're like, hey, I know something that other people don't know, so I'm able to make a better play than they are. Okay, great, that's what gives you the advantage. You know, when the person sold to you, they didn't know what it was that you knew when you were buying. When you sold to them, they didn't know what you knew when you were selling, right? So sometimes if you're in a rising tide, it raises all ships, it's fine, right? But the reality is that may be the smart thing to do in the short run. And you can, this again is I think something that's really changed in the world. Again, I'm talking about this like what is the new world versus the old world, right? It used to be that you existed within a pretty small community. You probably lived in a town. That town had, you know, maybe a couple thousand people. Like your reputation really mattered a lot.
Yeah.
Today, the reality is you exist in a global village of 7 point whatever billion people.
Yeah.
And your ability, if something goes wrong in one situation, to transfer into another is pretty great. And, is that a good thing? I mean, that's just the reality about what it is.
I
Right?
I understand. I understand
so-
where you're coming from.
Yeah. Anyway, so I guess what I would say is just kind of
It's almost like what you're suggesting here is being unethical in moderation. Like, don't cross a certain line. Like, there are lines and boundaries. Like, obviously, you shouldn't do something this unethical that is illegal. Or whether you shouldn't build a reputation of being unethical too, because you will lose the trustworthiness in your name. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
If what I said in the beginning came across as be ethical and be always ethical, totally didn't mean that, and I totally agree with Michael on that. Look, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So, and there's no way you'll make it otherwise, especially very rapidly on large scale. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But yes, there are certain boundaries that you shouldn't cross.
I think, to me, being ethical is a good goal. Like, if I have the option, I would rather be ethical. Every time. Like, not most of the time, every time, right? Recognizing that, hey, listen, life is messy, and you may find yourself in a situation. It's a little bit like, I think it was Oprah said something about, like, if you're always keeping your commitments, you're not playing a very big game. Like, the truth is just, if you shoot really high, you're going to miss. You're going to let some people down. There's going to be some problems that are like, if you're obsessed, you're like, hey, listen, I can't ever let somebody down, and I'm not willing to commit to the point where I might not let them down, you're going to play a small game. It's just the way that it goes. You're going to make some mistakes. Some people are going to get let down. Some people are probably going to get hurt. That is the reality of life.
Yeah.
And
it's true.
Yeah. So, it's not that you're trying to do it, right? I think there's a big difference between, hey, my intention is to screw people, and hey, listen, this came along, and, weighing out all my options, the best option that I can find involves a situation where, hey, listen, somebody's going to take the hit.
Yep. He's explaining the boundaries, because some of the people that we did mention do deliberately.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's some deliberate scum out there.
Unethical, yeah.
And that has paid off for some of them to some extent, right? I know people who get away with it, and I have a list of people who I think, it's horrible. If somebody was to come to me, I'd say have nothing to do with them. They're horrible. They're worthless. This is not good. And that's hurt them. I think they're an example of somebody who is just callous.
Yeah.
They're almost psychopathic in that regard. And that's not good.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between that and saying, hey, look, somebody had to take the loss here, and unfortunately, in this situation, that was you. Right? There's a very big difference between that.
No, I agree. Guys, let us know what you think in the comment section.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic.
Yeah, for sure. And there's just... I know a lot of people would probably be upset at me or upset at you for what was said. We're speaking
this
our
is an
minds
example
here.
of where honesty may not pay off.
Right.
We're going to find out.
Right.
But very realistically, right? I don't know. To me, I think that it's important to have the conversations that other people are not willing to have.
Sure.
And I'm just so sick of people sitting there and saying all these things that they feel good at a conference. But what's real life like? Real life, you're going to have to deal with these things.
No, I totally agree with you. So, guys, let us know down in the comment sections, what are the boundaries of being ethical, right? What boundaries do you follow? What else would you ask?
Yeah, for sure. Go on.
All right. Kind of funny, I don't see this one. Stress management. Your level of success directly correlates to how much stress you can manage. There are about 100 things one could insert here. I saw a lot. Good response already. I can agree there.
Yeah.
How much stress you can take, how much overwhelmed you can get and keep going. Definitely. Definitely. In all these ones that I scroll through.
I'm going to caveat that one a little bit again and say that
working smart and not working hard, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, from the standpoint of stress management, for instance, my wife and I have very different responses to things, right? For those of you who don't know, she has fire. And so she'll talk about how, like, I will be very calm, right? And it's like, okay, is it that she is more stressed than me? Probably. Why is she more stressed than me? Is it because the situation is different between her and I? No, oftentimes the situation is the same. We're dealing with it together. So I think part of it is less about your ability to cope with stress and more about simply not getting stressed by it. So that's kind of an emotional mastery piece.
Right, but I think you have learned how to cope with stress so well
Yes.
that you're not stressed.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, but the thing is that I think that there's a skill set in here. I guess that's like part of the thing. So one idea that somebody could get from this statement of coping with stress is like, I can take a beating, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Well, for me, I used to stress a lot about things that were completely out of my control. And, well, I can't say that I have perfected it now, but I've worked quite a bit on it to where if something is literally completely outside of my control, something that I'm going to get an answer on within 24 hours, those 24 hours I would usually sit down and stress like a mofo.
Yeah.
I've worked quite a bit on that to not do that anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like you said,
That's
it's
a great
some
example.
coping,
Yeah.
some coping ways of dealing with things for sure. So, but
That's
again,
like where meditation comes in. That's where, like, these types of things.
but if somebody doesn't have that discipline to deal with stress at all, so they get stressed and they go crazy, how can such person then go ahead and build a business and be a leader?
Sure.
Let alone, right?
Totally.
I think it's
although the other side of it is you can channel that stress to drive you, which can be effective.
But then again, you have to build some sort of discipline.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
And again,
Yeah,
the whole conversation about coping with stress and figuring out how to channel that.
Yep.
So very important. We agree with the gentleman here. Vision setting and cheerleading.
What do you think?
Well, okay. So let's define vision setting. Basically, understanding what the long-term game is and all that.
Yep. Okay. So.
We agree on that? Like, this is what we're talking about
I'm
here?
going to have a whole thing about this that I'll go into in a second, but...
Go for it.
Well, okay, so what does it mean to be a leader?
Are you asking and you're answering?
I mean, I'm throwing it out there before saying something about it, right?
Sure.
So if you just define, like, I actually did this, go through the dictionary and look up definitions of what it means to lead or all sorts of variations of that phrase. What does that mean? Because on the one hand, you can say, okay, is a leader the boss? Not necessarily. Bosses aren't necessarily leaders. To lead, as a verb, basically means to go ahead, right? And you can start looking at various allegories or metaphors or something like that for the concept of leadership. To me, the thing about leadership, the best analogy for it is actually a road. Okay, so a road, it goes ahead of you and you follow the road. Now that's quite different than, necessarily having a person. Okay, now you can also look and say, okay, there's personal leadership, self-leadership, right? Because oftentimes we confuse the idea of leadership with having followers. Now I think that ultimately leadership does go to having followers, and if you want to have big impact, you have to have followers. But often it starts with self-leadership. Okay. So the question is, what's the foundation of this? If you think of leadership as a road, which goes ahead, what does it have to have? Well, it has to have some sort of a direction. There's somewhere that it's going. If it's not going anywhere, there's no leadership. Pure, plain and simple. Like, that is the most fundamental thing. It is this absolute start of leadership. And so when I think about vision, I think about that. I think that, to me, where I push back a little bit on what gets said around vision between the reality and the falsehood, and is that there's this common line from Think and Grow Rich. Okay, in Think and Grow Rich, they have something about the importance, the clarity of your vision. You have to have this crystal clear vision.
Yeah.
And that's bullshit. Okay, in real life, it's not true.
I was so serious. That's where you at, right?
Yeah, I remember it was a very important, for me, moment in my life. I think I was 27 years old, and I sat in the office of somebody who was one of the most successful people that I'd met at the time. Had a company, did about $400 million a year, and had many other companies, stuff like this. So pretty successful guy, right? He was, much older. I think he was 62 at the time. And he and I talked, and I asked him something about this, and he said about like characteristics of successful people, and he said they have a foggy vision. Everybody that he knew had kind of a foggy vision, and I think that's like kind of important. Is Elon Musk might have like, hey, we're going to Mars. Is this a really clear vision? It's kind of foggy, right? Like you've got an idea, you've got a direction, you know where you're going. You're going to Mars, right? But the clarity of this, like what is it going to look like when you land on there? How are you going to come down? Is there going to be a base there? Is there going to, like, that stuff is all up in the air.
The
right?
goal is clear, the process and the aftermath isn't.
Yeah, I mean, so even like if I sit there and I say, hey, listen, what a lot of people, if you go into various seminars, what people will discuss is they'll say, hey, listen, getting rich isn't, that's not the goal. It's like you should have $15 million in 3.5 years. It's like, is that more effective? Most of the time it's not. It's really not. And I think part of the reason is that like nebulous things are quite emotionally inspiring. I think about this from the standpoint of I like to write. And very often the foundational inspiration for writing for me, like when I'm writing fiction, is very nebulous. It's very like I might have kind of, I have a feeling, I have maybe some colors, maybe I have kind of some imagery stuff around it, but it's not crystal clear.
Yeah.
But that's okay because all the sole purpose of this is to inform a direction, right? It gives me some direction and some fuel, some motivation to get me there. And that's all you need. You don't need this like crystal clear vision. But you do need, you definitely 100% need some direction. And so long as you have some direction that will get you to, and what I define as, I'll say not just a direction, but what I call a meaningful direction. So great leaders all have a meaningful direction. And meaningful in this sense, when I use the word meaning, it will make a difference. Like it's consequential, right? So you're like, okay, if I have a meaningful direction, then that's going to give me the fuel to take the steps. And as I take the steps, things will clarify around.
Yeah,
it's fine.
I get it.
So that would be my
Sort of,
answer to
and
their comment.
That's a perfect answer, honestly. Very philosophical guy, right? Obviously, you can see I can't match that freaking level of philosophy that he's bringing out here, which is
20 years of thinking about something, and get to bring it out right now.
So, yeah, like, look, your goal is financial independence. Like, you don't have to think of specifically the mansion with a pool, with the specific chandelier, with this and that and that. Like, and I think you can go a lot more specific than that, than just financial independence. But
even you think about something like Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. Like, did they think of Facebook being what it was, when they were starting? No. They just had like a loose, like, hey, listen, we're going to build this thing. It's kind of cool. And then there was kind of something organic in there. Yeah. Similar thing for Bill Gates, right? Like, did they start out with like this global vision of software and all this stuff? No.
Yeah, I get it.
So, yeah, I think you very, very often get that. So, is that all of their?
No, there's actually quite a lot. But
what about some of yours? Like, what would you say when we're talking about?
Well, one that I haven't seen here that I think is probably the most important. Lots of people talk about time allocation, and we spoke about that a bit earlier. I think that goes hand in hand with execution, and I think that was an
strong execution bias. Yep.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, you can talk all you want. This is the same thing we were talking about before. Like, you can have all the ideas, but if it doesn't come down to you actually taking the steps and getting going, nothing is going to take place, right? So I think execution is rather a quality that is absolutely necessary in order to be a leader. There's no leader that's not exceptional at execution.
It's funny because some people, that's like kind of what they want, right? They're like, hey, listen, I want to be the person who sits there and tells people what to do. And it's like, that's exactly not how you get there.
Yeah.
I found that in practice, one really big lesson for me, it was when I started doing events back in the day, was at first what I tried to do was go and get a team. Found it was extremely hard to recruit the team. The moment I started doing the event, regardless of the team, tons of people wanted to join the team.
Right.
Like, people are attracted to momentum. It's especially because it's just so hard to get momentum, that when you start getting momentum, other people will jump on board. Don't worry about it. Worry about getting momentum.
Yep. And Michael is great at that. So I'll make an example of this podcast specifically. How sometimes, so we're both great at execution, right?
You're probably better than I am.
I'm not gonna say I am. I think we're both.
He's very good executor. Very good executor.
Well, so are you.
Thank you.
So no, Michael was just telling me the past couple of weeks how it's more important for us to put out the episode than sit down and just nitpick over all the little details and how things could be better.
You guys can criticize that in the comments.
But look, it is important to push out the content than really slow down and not getting started, which is his point. And I think he's making a great point. So, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge what you're saying and how it applies even to the very podcast that we're shooting right now. So, smash the subscribe button. We have to take a moment.
Absolutely, very important. The subscribe button is going to give you very good luck. It's red. It's very lucky.
Yeah.
Click it. If you click the notification bell, it will stay that way and give you luck throughout the year. So it's very important.
These ethical promises, they do come in. They are,
false advertising and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I guess that's that. Do you want to add something? Because I think it's quite a long when it comes to
so I'm gonna throw some things in there. So I love your thing, and I'm trying to think what order I should do this in. Okay, so the one that I have noticed is super important, that I do not hear mentioned there. And in fact, I don't hear mentioned most places.
Yeah.
But what I've really observed in the top leaders, people like Elon Musk, people like Steve Jobs, etc., is raising the standard. Raising, setting, and holding a high standard. If you want to do big things well in the world, you got to have it. You got to have somebody there who's going to push the standard. Because the tendency of people, you just kind of think, right? Like, what is the default of people? People are naturally lazy, right? And that's not we're not talking about this in like a criticism way. It's in your biology, right? Like, your biology wants to consume less energy.
Yeah.
And so your tendency is not to push yourself all the time.
Yeah.
Well, a good leader is going to push you. They're just going to they're going to help to elevate your game, raise the quality of your work, raise the quality of the outcome, raise the impact that you're doing, And that's an uncomfortable thing, which means that, it goes along with one of the things that Jeff Bezos says, which kind of fits with the thing about stress, which is you have to be willing to be misunderstood for very long periods of time. Like, if you're expecting people to like you, if you're expecting people to understand you and support you, that's kind of this is kind of the opposite of the cheerleading thing, right? You can cheerlead your other people, but if you need cheerleaders, you're going to be in trouble. Like, you have to be willing to be misunderstood, to not have people support you. Like, that's the reality.
Yeah.
You're going to have to go through that. And so I'll frame that in, I actually did like a pretty in-depth study of leadership at one point in time.
Yeah.
And it was to come up with these 7 qualities of essential leaders, 7 essentials of world-class leaders was kind of the idea. And so I came up with 7, I was deliberately trying to come up with 7. So, but I kind of came up with it this way. So the first one was what I mentioned: meaningful direction.
Yeah.
Right? You have to have meaningful direction. Otherwise, what's the point? Number 2 is really fits into the thing you're talking about, execution. What I referred to as take 100% accountability and responsibility. What do I mean by this? First of all, once you've set that direction, you have to take it on yourself that you're going there no matter what. Not dependent on somebody. It does not go outside of you. It is you. It is all on you, no matter what. Meaning, there's a tendency to blame other people, to put things outside of yourself, to I was going to go there, but, Corona. Oh, I was going to go there, but, this person let me down. It's like, it's all on you. Like, if you're not willing to take it all on you, that is a quality of a leader, is that you are going to execute and you're going to take full accountability for getting there. and you'll just adapt and do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
The thing that goes into that as the third part is resolute determination in the face of adversity. So this kind of comes back to the stress thing, right? And also kind of this raising the standard is you will face hardships. This is, I don't know if you've looked at, Ray Dalio has this whole idea about like, what do you have to do? You have to set a goal, then you have to go pursue it. When you pursue it, what's going to happen? You're going to encounter problems. Now you have to deal with the problems. And most of this whole cycle is with dealing with those problems,
Sure.
right? So if you aren't, like, to me, this is a really interesting thing is, okay, nobody can follow you until you have a direction. Okay, this is just logic. Then, once you have it, nobody's going to follow you unless you're taking action to go after it, right? When you take action to go after it, and you hit a roadblock, you hit some obstacle, etc., what's going to happen is everybody in that situation is going to look to you to see how to respond.
Yeah.
And your response needs to be, this is not the beginning, this is not the end, this is the beginning. We're going to overcome this. Like, it's no big deal, we're going to get past it. Maybe it is a big deal, we're still going to get past it, you know? And they're going to take strength from you. That is like going to be what's going to happen there. This leads into the next part, which is the skill of being able to evaluate and prioritize. Like, good leaders, this is the being able to see the world as it is, right? You can say, okay, great. I can look out there and I can evaluate, because as a leader, a big part of my job is to make the right decisions. This was Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft, who I don't particularly think did a great job, etc. But I saw a thing where he was talking about leadership, and I thought it was really valuable, where he said, there's this part of leadership that people don't talk about, which is, yeah, it's great to have a direction. Great, it's great to have all these different things. But what's really important is to have the right direction. You know, it's like, a good leader isn't just leading you, they're leading you someplace good. They're leading you in the right way. And how do you get there? Well, you only get there by being able to have an effective process of evaluation. So you have to be able to look and say, hey, here's where we are. Let's be honest about this. Let's look, where are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are our opportunities, what are our threats, and navigate that and build the prioritization based on that.
Yeah.
And you do that first personally, but then it leads to the next part, which is you need to be able to work as a group. So you're then going to be, and you can't work as a group if you can't, prioritize what direction things are going, and all this kind of stuff. So that's what are we on here? Fifth thing is like working with people. Working with people is its whole own art. The reality is that I know a lot of people who are extremely effective individuals, and they're ineffective. I'm not even talking about interpersonally, because they might be interpersonal, but the ability to work as part of a team so that their productivity magnifies because there's 5 of them as opposed to just 1 of them. And I'm not talking about just like, hey, you delegate as a crutch to like, hey, let's throw off this little side task so I can extend my breadth a little bit. I'm talking about like amplifying yourself, right?
Yeah.
And amplifying them. They should be more effective because they're working with you than they would be if they were working alone. Everybody should be, that's kind of the ideal team environment, right?
Concept makes sense.
This leads us to number 6. Number 6, I find is very interesting, which is being an influential orator.
Yeah.
So this was something I found really interesting. Basically, when I did like a study on this subject, I said, okay, I would try throwing out qualities, right? Kind of like what they had on this list. Some would say passion, some would say this. And what I would do is I would say, okay, great. Can I find an example of a leader who was a good leader who didn't have that? So ethics is a good example of where you can start playing around with it, right? Honesty, tough to play around with it. So one of the things I found interesting was I could find examples of leaders who were blind, like they couldn't see. I could not find a single example of a leader who was mute. And this is quite interesting to me. It's like, you think about it, great leaders are often defined by the speeches they give, right? Whether you're writing, whether you're speaking, but the use of words to motivate and rally and influence people is incredibly important. Incredibly, incredibly important. And so I think that's one of the critical ones. And then the last one that comes out of there, that again, people don't talk enough about, I think, is developing people. So like the role of a leader.
Wait, developing?
Developing people.
Developing people, yeah.
Yeah, so basically it's that if you just think about this logically, leadership starts with you. It's a very personal one person thing. Then it extends beyond you. But what your ultimate goal is to build other leaders amongst those so that it carries on beyond you, right? And, you think about, I think this was kind of like a Steve Jobs type goal, right? It's like, hey, listen, he has to work with people to help develop them so that when he's no longer there, Apple doesn't collapse. And the greatest empires that were built by, they sustained for many, many generations into the future. that was, it wasn't just dependent on one person. I love Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan is very interesting. But after Genghis Khan died, what happened? I mean, more or less the empire just started splintering, and within a couple generations it was gone, in spite of having built the largest empire in the world at the time. Whereas you could compare that to Rome, right? And, it lasted for, hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So those would be my things when it comes to leadership.
Oh, you've thought about this quite a bit,
I thought about that a little bit, yeah.
Wow. All right.
So let's reverse it, because I think there's a really cool thing that Charlie Munger says.
Yeah.
Actually, before we reverse it, just like in your experience, based on your success, primarily obviously in business, but whatever as well, what have you noticed have been, maybe not to do with leadership, but just to do with success in general? What have you key life lessons learned?
A life lesson.
I mean, like lessons for business, lessons for success. Basically, when I say life lessons, I mean that you've learned over the course of your life.
Yeah. Well, so setting goals that are unrealistic just for the sake of setting them, I find is quite terrible.
Okay.
Yeah. So I used to do this early on, and I cut it out. It was just too frustrating when, look, you have some sort of momentum, but then you think that it's going to become exponential. So then you set some extremely unrealistic goal. Like, we're not talking about, it's just going to be challenging. A very, very unrealistic goal that you can't reach. And I mean, you put your heart and soul in trying to get there, but you can't. And it only frustrates you and discourages you, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, I've learned not to do that.
Yep.
I know people that do that personally, and I'm trying to convince them not to do it. And
do you find that the people who who are successful tend not to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
No, buddy, we're talking about very, very unrealistic.
Sure, yeah. I'm going to make $1 billion or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, not that or the other guy that yeah, not that bad, but something that would just be nearly impossible.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think Grant Cardone makes all sorts of examples of you should 10x, hit high and 10x and do this and that, and look, if you don't hit it, at least you hit somewhere near or whatever. Like, there's all sorts of things that are out there.
So but I want to just, before we dive into two parts about this. The first is, why is it that you think that it's not very effective?
Because if you are so far off, like, it's one thing. Like, I don't think you should make goals that you're just gonna hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
the goals should stretch you,
for sure,
but they shouldn't be
by a lot. Even by a lot, like, stretch you enough that where they could break you.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't. Like, if Elon said, "Look, we're going to Mars next month,"
would be highly ineffective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So the way that he would start allocating his budget, the way his engineers and everybody would work would be completely different. And in the end, if it all failed, if the rocket just blew up, killed a bunch of people or whatever, like, where does that lead you?
It's, I think, kind of the fallacy of the expression, shoot for the moon and you'll end up in the stars.
Right.
It's like, no, you might just not take off at all. Like that. Yeah. That's the reality.
So just to develop a bit more into this, I've found that it's effective being realistic, but also having a sense of optimism. I know a lot of people that are realistic and have a sense of pessimism. Sort of like, this is life, this is how it works, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Life is hard, so I might not even get there. So I don't think that's good for you. I don't know if you would agree there. Yeah. I think it's very, very important to also always have a sense of optimism. I mean, sure, you should look at things at face value and stuff like that, and be realistic and understand where you are. but you should always have a sense of optimism about, where things could be and where things will be.
Yep.
So, but yeah, going back to that point, sure, you should stretch yourself. You should stretch yourself enough to where, you could, extend, right, and become and expand and, be bigger than what you were before. But not so much so where you're so far off to where you discourage yourself.
Yeah.
And I know affiliates specifically do mistakes like that.
Yeah.
I'm telling you because I know a lot of these guys personally to where, they hit their first campaigns and they make $100 a day. And they're like, look, I want to make 25 grand a day by the end of this year. And it's like July. It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's like, this is very difficult.
Yeah.
25, 50 grand. It's like, you don't understand the difference of magnitudes here.
Yeah.
So, So I guess that would be a pretty important one that just came up right away.
What else? I mean, you've had lots of success at quite a young age. So what are some of the things that you think have been responsible for that?
Well, I think what we just talked about, I think execution is one of the most major things. Why? And being aggressive in business, which is something that you spoke about before. I think this is one of the main reasons why I've been successful. I mean, I've failed a ton, like most people, but I've been extremely aggressive at getting there. I've had the goal always to be independent. We've done a whole episode on that to where I dive a bit more into the story. So I had a big why, and I think that's very important because it engraved in me that, look, if I don't make this, I'm not going to be happy, right? Because it was very, very important to me that not only I make it and I live a certain life and I do certain things, but also my family being able to do so. But look, man, 12 years going at this, if I wasn't successful and I've worked as hard as I have and I've executed as much as I have, oh man, there would be something wrong. So seriously.
Do you know people who that would be true for?
To where they executed a ton and did a bunch and didn't succeed?
Look, we both know people who've been working on it for more than 12 years and are not nearly at that level of success.
Well, in a business setting, I want to speak of people that I know personally and not
Absolutely.
just, yeah. So I do know of a couple of people that have been going at it for a while, but I do question their level of execution.
Yeah.
Right, and I think doesn't matter if you're going at it 25, 30 years if you're not executing. Like the way me and you execute on a daily basis, the average person executes in a week or a month. There's a giant difference. Yeah. I would say that execution and aggressively pursuing my goals have been definitely one of the most major factors to my success.
Yeah. What else?
Allowing myself to sacrifice, and I guess that goes to hand in hand, sacrificing personal life, being okay with not having much of a social life, not having much of the luxuries in the beginning, living super simple, and as a kid too, I don't want to say anything. My parents are the absolute best people in the world. They would take care of us very well, but I would try to minimize any luxuries that I had, save my money and stuff like that. Whole mindset there, but I making a personal sacrifice, I think, would be another thing to talk about. How I would just allocate my time towards business and not myself, in the sense of enjoying myself, entertaining myself. So it would just be, hard years of just work. So I think, over time, especially that's really quite something, right?
Yep.
Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, so this is where there's a difference between business success and life success, I would say. And I have often said, if you read Warren Buffett's biography, called Snowball, and he would have like he would get his wife to cut his hair as opposed to paying for a haircut because he'd be like looking at the value of that haircut if he was to compound it over 30 years. So he's like, no, thank you. I don't want to pay $20,000 for a haircut. Thank you very much. And I think that's a little extreme. I mean, I kind of look at it as, here's this guy who now has $80 billion, but what has he not experienced along the way? Has he ever gone skydiving? Has he ever gone bungee jumping? Has he ever gone, and he kind of can't now, right? So he's certainly more successful financially than a lot of people who have done those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But, there is a certain richness that comes from living life. And
absolutely.
I think, hopefully, you realize that balance. There's another example I remember hearing about. There's like two brothers where their dad had told them, like, hey, do whatever you want after 30, but just work your ass off, do whatever sacrifice is necessary to be successful financially by the age of until you're 30.
Yeah.
The one guy got to 30 and died. And
right.
Then you're like, well, what was the point? I know somebody who, I know a number of people who have made quite a decent amount of money, many millions of dollars into the over $10 million. And, in a fairly short period of time, and then they've lost it all. And it's like, they didn't enjoy it at the time. And it's like, their whole story that they told themselves was, hey, I'm doing this for this bigger thing and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, but then you don't end up with the bigger thing anyway. Yeah. So if you had gone and taken a few $100,000, $500,000, $1 million even, and instead of decided and done something with it, you would be at the same place as you are today, but you would also have these other experiences. And so I think that, there's kind of like the science and there's the art. And this is kind of the art part, right? Like, you really have to feel it out for yourself. I don't think that there is a hard and fast, here's what you can do. But I do think that the bias that people have is to tend towards leisure, to tend towards self-indulgence, etc., as opposed to discipline, restraint.
But how do you build discipline? You deliberately throw off the balance, right? You basically, and I think that's true almost 100% of the times.
That people who are successful always throw off the balance, or that you build the discipline by throwing off the balance?
The latter.
That's an interesting question. I don't know that that's true. I think that for many people, in many situations, the ability to sustain discipline is a function of psychology and emotion, and that sometimes you need to kind of take care of, it's like the best example is, hey, listen, how do you go on a diet? Well, you just don't eat, It's like, if you try and not eat too much, you're eventually just going to splurge, right? You're just going to gorge yourself. That's not very healthy. What you kind of want to do is you want to have a sustainable diet that you can work with over the long period of time. So it's like, yeah, you have, say, calorie reduction, you eliminate foods that are not good for you or whatever, and you find a way to do that in a way that's sustainable. So, I think just about, okay, let's talk about us. So, you work very hard, very good, has paid off for you, great. At the same time, I think you are an example of somebody who indulges enough to give themselves enough wins to be psychologically rewarding and psychologically sustaining. Mm-hmm. I think, imagine if, it's like, hey, look, you still decided to live in a 60 square meter apartment because, hey, you could save a few €1,000s a month or something.
Right.
It's like, the problem is that psychologically, then why are you doing it?
Sure.
You have to have something to drive you. And giving yourself those rewards actually helps to improve the discipline, because you're like, oh, this feels great, right? Yep. You have to have a good feeling in there somewhere, otherwise it just breaks down.
Absolutely.
So
I agree.
That's where I feel like, there is a balance. And yeah, obviously it's imbalanced compared to what most people do.
But when you're starting out, don't you have to throw it off?
It's a good question.
In the beginning,
I don't know.
Should you reward yourself in the beginning? I think
I think you probably should, actually. Okay. So here's an example. And reward yourself, you can have some context around that. But there is a thing, have you heard of beginner's luck?
Las Vegas.
Yeah, exactly. So it turns out when they study...
Should I tell people? I mean, I don't
go
even
for
know.
it. Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Tell a story.
We should. I think I have it on my old phone. We should probably attach the clip around here or something like this to where, so is a small piece of it. But basically, went to Las Vegas. We took our company, all our employees, flew them to Las Vegas for a quick vacation. So that was, I think, 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Never been to a casino in my whole life. Never once, right? Or wait, maybe that would be a lie. Wait, no. I probably was once with my sister. Never actually touched the machine or did anything. So that would be true. So, and one of our managers, he would just be joking all the time about beginner's luck and how, look, I think you're gonna be very lucky and make a lot of money. And I would always say, yeah, whatever, and this and that, and let's see what happens. So we were playing slot machines. I don't remember specifically the game's name. Well, if we do have the video here, you'll see it. And basically, I was just so I agreed with the guys. I would just bet $100, so that would be 5 20s. So I was just inserting the 20s right into the slot machine. So I'm on the, I think it was on the third 20, right, going for 60. And as I inserted the 20 right before it goes in, with this side of my hand, I pressed the max bet button. Now, the max bet button set in before the 20 got in, so the machine started going, so it spit the 20 back out, and there it was, $500, right? And
that's great,
right? And so in the video, you see the reaction of all these other guys are like, "Oh man, what the hell?" And I wish I had more of it. I mean, I should have been filming right from the beginning just to show it, but that would have probably, I don't know, probably even ruined my chances. But that was just insane. And since then, one of these guys have been making jokes like, make more of these accidents, just don't look while you insert the the dollars in there, and never worked again, I can tell you this. So, but yeah, $500 just like that.
Nice, that's awesome. Well, I bring it up because when they do studies, they find that most of these successful gamblers, like poker players and things like this, have a beginner's luck story. Okay, and so you can say, well, hang on, does that mean that there's such a thing as beginner's luck?
Or could it be that the casino was rigging it against me, so they can, I don't know.
So what they say is that there's a success bias in here, meaning that people who didn't have beginner's luck tended to quit. People who getting that first win was psychologically what drove the person to continue at it over and over again. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think when you get started, like, it's kind of like if you're having a new salesperson, okay? In my opinion, one of the things you want to do is get them a win as soon as possible. Sure. Like, if that person has to go, it's like, hey, well, you know what? The way that we're going to do this is we're going to show them the ropes. So we're going to make it really hard for them up front. For the first month, they're not going to make any sales. It's like, that's going to be a brutal, 30 days on the phones or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas if they get on and they have a win and they make some money and they can see it can be successful, it gives them the fuel psychologically to keep going. And I really think that's super important. While we're talking about this subject, in my opinion, one of the best books on kind of the subject of success, etc., is High Performance Habits by Brendon Burchard. And he did a fairly large study. And a lot of what he talks about really quite makes sense. He says, okay, what do people need? The number one thing, he has like I think it's 6 habits or something like that. And he's like, okay, the first thing they need is they seek clarity. So they need to be clear. Like seeking clarity is like the first habit of success. The second, I might have them in the wrong order here, but I don't know if I can remember them all, but let's see if I can. So the second one...
You will.
The second one is they generate energy.
Yeah.
And if you just think about this, it's like, look, you can't do anything unless you're clear on what to do. Number 2, if you have no energy to pursue it, then, you're not going to, that's it, right? You're done. The third one is kind of like that. I don't remember exactly how he phrases it, but it's basically the question of drive, right? Of like motivation. So it's like it's not enough to have energy. You need physical energy to do it, but you need drive to actually go after it. So they do that. Then you have another one of them is they cultivate influence, right? So you have to have influence with people. What else is there here? I want to say that one is about demonstrate courage. That's probably like an underrated one. When we talk about kind of these underrated qualities, I feel like courage is just. I feel like back in the day, it used to be a virtue that we would talk a lot about, right? You kind of like read these old things from Greek mythology, from the days of knights, etc. Like courage was really this quality that was bolstered, probably in part because it was a war-driven society, right? Meaning that a lot of this stuff would come out of being a soldier, etc. And so being courageous was really important. But today, we don't have that same environment. So we don't think about courage the same way. But I think actually courage is really important.
Agree.
And so, there's that one. And then what was his other one? It's productivity. What does he call it? Anyway, basically, he talks about prolific quality output. That's his measure. Like basically, a person should have prolific quality output. And so those are his 6 and you just think about it. It's like, okay, great. I have to have clarity about what to do. I have to have the energy physically to do it. I need to have the drive to do it. Then I need to do prolific quality output. I need to cultivate influence, and I need to have courage. And
one thing, well, it adds on to having courage that wasn't mentioned here either, that I think is rather important, and something I would mention also onto something that's responsible for both my success and Michael's success is, well, it's 2 things, but they go hand in hand with courage, is having the ability to take risks and not being complacent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so me and you had a conversation about this on, look, you can have a net worth of 10 grand, 100 grand, or $1 million. In the end, are you still willing to take aggressive risk? Because that's not the place you want to be at.
Yep.
Right? So lots of people, and I've noticed that for myself personally also, as I got onto different levels. Like when I hit the 100K, I started taking less risk, and I was like, what's wrong? Like a few months in, I started realizing that I'm not spending, as aggressively as I used to on myself, on my ad strategies, just, taking a bunch of more risks. So, and I realized it was, I just hit 100 grand in the bank. I don't want to fuck with that. And it was such a silly thing to think about. So I had a small thing when I hit $1 million in the bank, but that was like super short. There was some family bias in there too, like, come on, you just hit $1 million, you don't have to, but it's so silly, right? It's like, look, that's just figure, this is nothing, this is money, like, it's nothing, right? It's worthless, literally. And do I want to be at $1 million? No, I want to be way more. So having the ability to just, cut off the complacency and just, aggressively take risks regardless of the level you get to, so you can, go on to the next thing, right? And go to the next level.
Yeah.
So
I heard somebody describe it as like, rock the boat when you're at the peak of your success or something like that. And it's something that I think it's actually one of, as we talk about kind of solutions in the world, et cetera, I think it's one of the dysfunctional things that happens in society and in large companies, is that you get to a point where the perceived risk of loss is far greater than the benefit of gain and change. And so you get this situation where you become complacent and you don't do something because you're like, hey, we've got a $50 billion business here. We could screw that up. The loss of that is huge. So let's not go and do this. And this is why Ford, GM, Chrysler, Volkswagen, et cetera, aren't Tesla, right?
I know as a marketer, and any other marketers watching this, lots of them will feel me here, will be when you get to a certain profitable stage with a client, and then suddenly that client tells you, look, this is working, don't fuck with it. But you still want to test. You still want to improve on, on the current strategy and the current model. I mean, it's profitable, sure. It could even be bringing in a, 10x ROAS, whatever, right? ROAS being return on ad spend for the non-marketers. But the client is just, dead on, very, very sure that, look, don't mess with it. Just let it roll because it's working.
Yep.
And this is true for in the marketing space, especially. Oh man, lots of clients that really don't understand how things work, and get complacent very quick.
I guess that fits in with the courage thing partially, right? Because it's like you're afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, what are you really losing, right? Like, you're still gonna have the 10x thing working on the side. Just allocate even a small budget on continuing testing. But I've seen this in my personal, in my career, right? Like where people tell me this works, don't mess with it. And I find that to be, so annoying. So annoying. Because it doesn't allow you to develop and further cultivate what you have. So.
Yeah. So for me, I have like this mental model that I think is pretty important. I wish that more people had this, which is this idea that we're here.
Yeah.
And we only have this one time. So why would you do anything less than giving it your all? Like, if you could be here, like, why would you be okay with this? This is your only chance. Why would you be okay with sitting here when this is your only chance? So for me, there's just like this mental thing of like, hey, we're here. So because we're here, we might as well go all out.
Yeah.
We might as well shoot high.
Yeah.
We might as well, if you can keep pushing it, keep pushing it. Like if you crash and burn, okay, at least you tried. Like, what do you want to die and look back and say, well, I probably could have pushed it more, but I didn't try. To me, I would feel horrible.
I don't like that a lot of people also take this advice the wrong way and say, well, look, we only live one life. So why not indulge myself onto XYZ and, still pursue what it is that I'm pursuing. And, well, do you think that's good? Because a lot of people overuse this. They abuse it like crazy, right? Because look, I live one life. I should go out and party. Look, I'm still working hard. I'm still doing this and that. One life, I should have a car, the car I want. And have it now because, look, like that other story, might be 30 and die.
Sure.
Because, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that part of that comes from a lack of vision and a lack of ambition. Meaning that if people's vision and ambition is not very big, then it makes a lot of sense to go and get the car now because what are you headed towards? You're headed towards the white picket fence with 2.1 kids, a dog, and it's like that's kind of if that's where you're headed, then you can't really see the costs of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're like, hey, where I'm headed is really big in the world, is really important in the world, is whatever. It's like, and you start to like conceptualize and you're realistic with yourself. You have effective evaluation skills to be able to figure out like, okay, what is it going to take to get there? Like this is like a long journey, etc. And then two things happen, I think. One is you see the price that you pay for that. The second thing is you can see how this isn't such a big deal anyway, because I'm going to have so much better on the other end of it anyway, right? So you're like, okay, do I need to go and live in this, I don't know, apartment that's 3 times or house is 3 times as big as what I've got? No, I'm not worried about that because I'm going to live in one 10 times bigger than that, 5 years from now. So who cares, right? So I think there's something, like a lot of this stuff, you can kind of give all sorts of ideas, but it's like, what is the origin of them? It's like, I think part of the origin of them is these psychological pieces that are at the root. And if you kind of address some of those psychological pieces, I feel like those help to take care of some of this.
But this is what I was saying. I think that there is an imbalance in the beginning. Like you shouldn't get that car. You shouldn't get that house. You shouldn't do those things that would give you so much pleasure and enjoyment and whatever in the beginning, because you don't deserve them yet. And seriously,
That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
very interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was one of my mom's friend. Well, it's not just my mom's friend; it's a family friend. She flew in here. She flew to Sofia from Athens, and we were having a whole conversation about how I got here and all these types of stuff. And I was telling her that I have a whole valuation system that I'm controlling myself. Well, the house that I live in now, I could easily rent 34 years ago, no problem.
Yeah.
Like I would be able to do it, still have money for the business and all that stuff. But I can tell you, I would tell myself, I don't deserve that house. I'm still not on a certain level. Like I still have to, hustle harder, take more risks, do all this stuff. Once I'm on that level, then I'll do it.
Yep.
And I've done this for a few different things.
Yeah.
But house being one, generally the way I live being one of those things. Even with the chef that we have at the home, like we would cook, ourselves, do certain things. We could, what is it to hire a chef? In the end, it's an extra, whatever. Like depends on where you are, but you're just paying somebody for a part-time or full-time, depending on what you want to do. But until I got to a certain level, I didn't do those things. And I think that's very important. In the beginning, you don't deserve to have that car. You don't deserve to have that house. You should be working your ass off. Get to certain levels and goals first, and then do whatever it is that you got to do. But yeah, I think in the beginning there is
I would push back on the chef one a little bit, but that's a whole other conversation.
Sure, go for it.
I mean, so I hired somebody, quite a number of years ago, and the reason was not as a form of indulgence, but as a form of efficiency, right? So it's like, okay.
It is a luxury though, and that's how I would view it, because
I looked at it as, hey, listen, if I hire somebody to cook for me, I'm going to eat healthier, which is better for me. And
there are big other benefits.
The time that I free up paying somebody else, my time, like I can spend that time, what I pay them is far less than I would earn in the same amount of time.
I 100% agree with you.
I'm far better off to go and hire the chef.
Yes.
And, then I'm also, I'm saving time as well, because, I would normally go out and get groceries, like all these things. There's so many things that I think people should delegate. So I actually am a strong believer that part of when we talk about like wealth and income inequality, which we did the episode the other day, I think that people who are reasonable income earners should hire a lot more people. I think that if you make $10,000 a month and you mow your own lawn, that's probably bordering on unethical. I think that you should not.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will push back. There's kind of this like, oh, but I want to do it. Oh, it's like, no. Here's the thing, like somebody else probably. They can do this job for sure. You can do it too, but you're not making the best use of your time and talent by doing that. The amount of money you can make from it is not so good, and it's like a form of wealth redistribution to say, hey, I'm going to hire somebody for $20 an hour or $10 an hour, whatever the number happens to be wherever you are, right, to go and mow the lawn, than for me to go and mow the lawn. You should not mow the lawn.
I agree.
You should not shovel your own snow. You should probably not go and do a bunch of your own errands. You should probably not clean your own place. Not because you're above these things. Not because, these things aren't good enough for you. But it's just because in the broader view of society, look, there's people who would love to have that job. I remember hiring a guy to do, I hired him to mow my lawn. But I ended up hiring him to do all kinds of stuff for me. And it turned out that he was a chef. He was my first chef who I hired. And it turned out he had trained for 7 years under this Sicilian chef in Europe and all sorts of things. And he was like, his dream was to go and to start his own place. And I was like, hey, why don't you work for me? We can go through and I can invite some people over and, you can cook for them and they can see what the food is like. And I ended up referring him to some other clients and things like this. And, it worked quite well. But he was super happy when I gave him this job, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, this was a good win-win.
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer that people should hire people far more than they do. Like the future, we talk about, we're in a world of automation. People are losing jobs and all this kind of stuff. Where that will change, and we'll do a thing on artificial intelligence. We'll do a future episode on that where we can talk about it. But where jobs are going to come from is primarily the service sector.
I agree, but that look, for somebody that has a fair bit of success, that can be inexpensive. Having an additional one person, at home.
Yep.
In the beginning, should people go and hire people to, be their chefs, be their personal trainers, do this, do that? In the beginning, you shouldn't do that.
You don't have the money to do that.
Yeah, but again, even if you do, let's say you're making $5-6 a month and your rent costs $3,000 and your groceries cost $2,000.
Yeah, your rent shouldn't cost $3,000 if you're making $5-6,000. It would be my argument.
All right, man.
Sure.
So, anyways, like if you have a bit of cash every single month, that's let's say vacant, you can take that available, not vacant, and use that. You shouldn't be going and hiring a chef or a personal trainer. That should go on levels. Sort of goes back to what I was saying. You have to deserve it, man. You're making enough to do that comfortably. So for me, I mean, you know this personally.
Yep.
My girlfriend is an incredible cook.
Yep.
During quarantine, we ate a good food together. So, but yeah, I mean, I would just not feel comfortable enough, even, and that's not long ago, to do that. But yeah, after I pushed very, very hard over the last half a year, I decided that, I'll take that step, and we did. And I don't know if
I feel like hindsight being 2020, though, you would have taken that step earlier.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible. But yeah, I just think those things should go in levels, and people should be a little more conservative when it comes to spending all this money on their personal entertainment and luxuries that are not important.
Yeah.
So
I think that there's kind of like this pump action that happens. I don't know how that sounds, but anyway. But when I say this pump action, what I mean is, in a pump you have like, or there'll be like a vacuum, right? And the vacuum pulls you, right? So it's like if you deprive yourself of something, that void creates a value which creates some drive, right? Then at the same time you have some rewards, and that creates some drive. Okay, shut up.
did you just come up with that?
Yes.
Are you kidding? Bro, how do you come up with those things?
Which? Okay, anyway. Moving on.
No way. No, I can't do that. I can't do that, man.
All right.
Oh my god. Well,
Okay.
I bet there might be some people that would like to hear the end of this, but it's great. I don't know.
I mean, I think I explained the sense of it. The whole point is that when you deprive yourself of something which pulls you towards it, like it gives you incentive to do it, but at the same time, when you reward yourself a little bit, that also reinforces, what gets rewarded gets repeated, and you go in that cycle. And you kind of want to constantly be creating this space, which is like, hey, I don't feel comfortable because I want this, but I haven't deserved it yet, so I'm going to go here. And but at the same time, you got rewarded for the gains that you have made, so you feel like, okay, well, that feels pretty good, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, totally agree there. Well, let's see. Is there something else that I could add here? Well, in the meantime, while I think about this, is there another obvious one that I'm missing?
I have like 2 or 3 at least.
Obvious ones.
I think obvious ones. I mean, obvious maybe, but in the sense that a lot of people obviously haven't mentioned them, and so they're obvious when you know about them, but they're not necessarily obvious before you know about them or before you think about them. But I don't want to talk about them directly. What I'd rather do is parlay a little bit into this subject of why people don't succeed. And I think these things will get exposed through why it is that people don't succeed. So if you were to go through and look at people who haven't succeeded.
But they tried, or they're just wondering? Because, I mean, I'm 23. I have a lot of friends that are, in college. And, they still either working a job, or they don't know what they want to pursue. They're going to college, but they're either there because their mom and dad wants them to be there, or they chose a certain subject and they're very unsure about whether or not this will be what they will pursue in their life.
Sure.
So just given this context, so people
I would say that people who try and they fail, why do they fail?
I mean, that is super broad.
Yeah, but I think it's useful because, so this is like a Charlie Munger concept, is you reverse engineer success by reverse engineering failure. If you can avoid all the things that cause you to fail, then, you end up succeeding kind of concept.
Sure. Well, look, it can be for any number of reasons, including all the things that we mentioned earlier on in the video, here in the conversation.
Sure.
Look, for example, somebody starts a marketing campaign, they see that it doesn't make money, they cut it. They haven't studied the data. They haven't done enough research. It can be a million things that I could mention.
So let's break that down. I think this is a really great microcosm for it. So you're going to go into a marketing campaign. And so you have a campaign that doesn't succeed, and you cut it. So what would a person have done to make it succeed?
So it depends on why it failed in the first place, right? For example, did you spend enough money to figure out what your ideal audience is?
Okay, let's name this, because I think there's a useful thing here, is that one of the first reasons, if I think about reasons for business failure, the number one reason businesses fail, I think you can break them down into a pretty small number of reasons. One of them is they run out of money.
Sure.
So insufficient resources, basically.
Well, if you don't have enough money, you shouldn't go into business a lot of times too. Look,
okay, so but
I know guys and gals that want to do paid advertising, for example, and they have $100. They're like, look, I have $100. I can make it work. It's like, no, you're not going to make it work. Yeah. Most likely, you're not going to make it work unless you're super lucky, and with $100, you end up making a $5,000 sale or something like that, and you end up with a bit of capital.
Yep.
Like there is a minimum entry there. So figure out how to make that money and come back. Go work a job. Go do something.
Yep.
So I don't think it's for everybody and for any budget. Specifically the marketing, that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And my point there is just to mention that I think that there's a whole set of skills and awareness around the realization that a big reason people fail is they run out of money. And so if you realize that, you say, okay, well, hang on a minute. First of all, I want to conserve my resources really, really carefully at first. Mm-hmm. And in this sense, like when I think about business, I break down various different stages, right? Where it's like one of those, there's probably two phases that lead up to the point of profitability. So you'll go through those two phases before you ever get to be profitable. Well, before then, you got to be really careful with your money.
Absolutely.
Because you could run out of money and you have no profitability to replenish that.
Right.
So the game totally changes when you have profitability coming in. And your whole strategy is going to change. So earlier on, what are you paying attention to? Be really lean, right? Super, super lean.
Yeah.
Number two,
do a tons of research to see what data is already available out there, free of charge. If there's anybody else currently pursuing it, lots of affiliates, sleazy affiliates will say just go and copy whatever is working, and that's that, which is usually not the case because you don't always have the data. You can't just copy an ad that it works. Not always the case. But do a bunch of research, see what data is out there that you can get free of charge that you can use to your advantage. See whatever statistics are out there on your ideal audience, depending on the industry that you're in. Whatever you can learn free of charge, go do it. Like that would probably be the first step, regardless of the budget. But yes.
Yeah. So you've got that, right? And it's like, all right, so you want to keep lean. Number two, you probably want to have some other income stream as much as possible during that stage.
For sure.
So I made this mistake with my second company where I cut off my existing income streams to be able to focus 100% on this thing. It was a tremendously stupid thing to do. It was a very, very bad idea. I don't know what it cost me over time, but it cost me a lot. And so being able to sustain yourself while you're building something else, very important. Next, I would say part of that is testing small. Very, very important to test small as opposed to testing big. Like when you're getting started out, you just don't have the resources to test big.
Yeah.
So be aware of that. Like you said, find different ways of shortcutting and hacking that process. I would say being as close as possible to the data. So a really great example, you and I did that campaign with respect to immigration back in the day. And one of the things that's...
Not really back in the day, but...
Okay, whatever, a year ago or something like that. And I think one of the interesting things about that, kind of observing your style, was that early on, rather than having all sorts of a complex funnel and stuff, you were quite directly involved in communicating with the leads.
Yes, I basically was taking care of the whole process.
Yes. And I think the interesting thing about that is you get extremely good quality data. It's very high fidelity data when you're involved like that. So this is where it's kind of like you almost don't want to go and just run ads. You're almost better to sell in person, because that's where you're going to get the greatest amount of feedback for, like, what are people saying? Are they saying the price is way off whack? Are they don't like the product? They don't like the messaging? How do I message? Like, you just think about refining from the standpoint of, and you know, we're going very marketing. So not for people who aren't marketers, I think the principles still apply to a lot of other areas.
Sure.
Right? And that is, you're like, okay, if I go and try and write ad copy, what am I going to write? Well, if I've sold to you in person, then I'm going to basically write based on what I sell in person. And if trying to write a sales letter and get feedback from the market on that sales letter based on running paid ads is much more expensive in a sense than going and trying to talk to some people and have a conversation and in real time get feedback about how are they responding to what's going on here. Then I can take that and I can inform it and I can put it into here.
Yeah.
So being close to data, and I noticed this with investing too, a really big problem people have when they're investing is they have no concept of how to do due diligence. And a big part of like what that comes down to is they don't get the concept of you want to go as close to the information as possible. This, by the way, extends beyond due diligence, extends beyond investing. You can look at fact checking. Like, I'll hear these people who are conspiracy theory, like they're into some conspiracy theory nonsense, and they're like, I've been doing a lot of research, and their version of research is reading some people's opinion on the internet. That's not research. Okay, reading what people say about the banking system is not studying the banking system. Researching the banking system is reading the Banking Act. That's like doing research. So you want to get as close to the real information as possible. I remember I was involved in, it was a purchase of a drinking water company. Okay, and it ended up the people who were selling it was like a complete fraud. And so we reviewed afterwards, like, okay, like how could you have detected? By complete fraud, basically what I mean is they exaggerated their financials dramatically. Their costs were not really what their costs were. They were much higher. Their contracts didn't say what they said, all kinds of different things like this, right? So it was like, in the due diligence, what do? You don't trust what somebody says about the contract. You read the contract.
Absolutely.
You know? Here they'd given us supposed financials from accounting firms. What we realized, so they'd falsified that. It was not true. And we were like, in the future, what would you do? You would actually go to the accounting firm and talk to them. Why? It's like, hey, you guys prepared this? Or you would go and you would actually go through, you would go to the facility, you would measure yourself what it is that was actually going on. Like, what's the volume of people who are coming in? How many people are actually working here? What does that add up to in terms of number of man hours, et cetera? Like, it's meticulous work. And so people don't want to do it, right? This is like, why do people fail? People fail because they're just not willing to put in the work, right? Like, you have to, there's a line a friend of mine says, he's like, when it comes to success, you always pay full price and you always pay in advance.
Yeah.
And I think that's very interesting, right? Like, you pay that price in advance. By the time you actually realize the gain, you've already done all the work for it. There's one of my favorite quotes ever. Mark Cuban has it, which is a quote from Bobby Knight, who was a very famous basketball coach.
Love Mark. Mark's great.
Mark's got some great stuff, absolutely. You're welcome to come on our show, Mark. We'll give you at least 20 minutes that you can talk. Seriously, anybody like Mark Cuban, very cool. But I remember this quote, and it was, everyone has the will to win. It's only those who have the will to prepare who actually do win. Mm-hmm. And I think about that, it's just like, all of the success comes in the preparation. If you go, another similar example, a friend of mine knew somebody who won something, or I don't know if it was a silent auction or whatever, but somehow they got to go play play golf with Tiger Woods. And he said the guy like showed up like 2 hours early and was practicing and all this kind of stuff. And Tiger came like 15 minutes before, hit a few balls, and the guy was like, "Oh, aren't you going to practice?" And Tiger was like, "Look, if you didn't bring your A game, you're not going to find it here."
Right.
And I think there's just so much to be said for that, right? It's like Tiger won the game before the game started because he won it in the 20, 30 years of practice that he did before then. What happens, you just can't cram for something like that, right? That's just not the way that it works. You can't have lots of examples of that. It's like, I would sometimes say, nothing you do today can make up for what you didn't do for the last 5 years. It just doesn't. It's just not the way that it works. So that's, I think, an important concept in all this. So that's the kind of going. If we were to go and dive into another part of that, a friend of mine has a really interesting thing he says. One of my favorite things on success. Andrew Masanto, he used to have a blog that this was in, but the blog, unfortunately, something happened to it. It's not up anymore.
But no sponsorship either, so.
Yeah. Andrew's awesome. But anyway, I remember him mentioning, he wrote this thing on why do people not succeed. And he's a very successful guy. And very consistently successful, which is, I think, a really good indicator. You can get lucky once, but to do it repeatedly is something. Anyway, he mentioned, he said the first reason is, people just don't want it bad enough. And so, okay, great. We've kind of talked about that.
So the commitment is there.
Yeah.
It's not there.
Well, so yes and no, because the second part kind of fits into it. Not wanting it bad enough, you're just not willing to do what it takes. But the second part he said is much more interesting. And he said, and this is, I think, a very modern thing that we maybe didn't see as much in the past, but is really important today, is that people are used to linear effort for linear results. And so what he said is, like, you're used to, you go to the gym, you work out a little, you get a little result. You work out a lot, you get a big result. You go to a job, you work 4 hours, you get a little bit, you work 8 hours, you get more, right? He's like, in business, you have to be willing to work a tremendous amount for no result. And
True.
Psychologically, that takes people out. Like, it's part of why I've mentioned the beginner's luck thing, right? Like, a person having a win gives them that energy to keep going. You have to be willing to put in a tremendous amount of work, to be super frustrated, to go through a ton of things, to burn a bunch of money, to all this stuff, and have no results.
Yeah.
And because you don't know, at some point, if you're willing to stick with it for long enough, and you're willing to adapt and learn, you will get something that will hit. But can you stick it out that long? Like, runway is a really, really important thing. For those of you who don't know, the idea of runway is basically like, a plane is trying to take off and it only has so much runway. And when you run out of runway, you're going to crash, right? So you have to take off before then. So a big part of success is being able to extend your runway really far. I'm a huge Steve Jobs and Elon Musk fan. Like, if you just look at their track record, we're talking about they basically have gone 5 for 5 or 4 for 5, 4 for 4, whatever, in environments where nobody does that, right? Like, you have a very high failure rate. But at the same time, if you look at, Musk had, his early success with Zip2 and then PayPal. But if you look at the success of Tesla and SpaceX, these only really were able to succeed because of the fact that he had enough personal money to give that company quite a bit of runway.
Yeah.
Like, those companies both should have gone bankrupt. The point was that he had come off of a big enough win that he could sustain it long enough to learn enough to get to that inflection point. Same thing with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, both Next and Pixar should have gone bankrupt.
True. Yeah, I know. I've heard of that.
Yeah. But he had enough money that he was able to sustain it through. And so just being able to stay in the game is a really big thing. If you cannot stay in the game, you lose automatically. And I think that staying in the game has maybe 3 key components. So the one is, hey, listen, you can run out of money. The second is you run out of motivation, right? You got to find some way to keep that drive there, keep going. The third one, I think, is you have bad partners. And the bad partners just cause things to go apart.
Yeah. Well, you don't always have partners, but
no, but
you do.
But you could. So these are I think if somebody's going to fail, it's there's probably initially 4 things that might have happened. One is it was simply a bad idea. right? Like, hey, listen, you could have a bad opportunity.
Bad product, bad service for marketers too.
Yep, absolutely. Number 2, you could have run out of money, right? It was a great product, great idea, et cetera. You just couldn't go far enough. Number 3, the iteration cycle of learning, you either weren't able to learn long enough, or you couldn't maintain the motivation and drive to go and do that. And number 4 is you had all those things, but you had partnership problems, and that made it fall apart. So what that tells me, when I kind of reverse engineer it, is I say, okay, number 1, you need to find a good opportunity. Like, I think it's underappreciated in a lot of circles of business how important the right opportunity is. And of course, when you're getting started, you can't obsess over it because you don't know, right? But the difference between a great opportunity and a bad opportunity is a world of difference.
Absolutely.
So you want to be in a position where you say, all right, look, I'm really going to look for something that it's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And so like this is where I think there's something almost irresponsible about kind of starting old school businesses, is your chances of succeeding in business at a high level if you start an old school bricks and mortar type business.
Restaurant?
Yeah, exactly. Is not very high.
Yeah.
Right? Very, very challenging. Not impossible. You might say, hey, I want to be the next McDonald's. Very, very hard.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're like, hey, I'm going to go learn Solidity.
Street chefs would disagree, but
No, I mean, there's some success stories out there for sure.
Yeah.
But if you look and you're like, hey, I'm going to be a Solidity developer today, well, your chances of succeeding are super high. Solidity is a programming languages for Ethereum and blockchain, which is...
I see. I
it's
didn't know myself.
Yeah, so there's like just a very narrow number of people who have that skill set and extremely high demand for those people. So you don't have to be very good at it to succeed at it today.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like, I think the smartest way to do that is to find trends, to find waves, right? It's like, okay, like this is like exploding right now. This is something you can get in on and be a part of. And it's like a rising tide raises all ships. It's just so much easier to sell into a growing market than to sell into a shrinking market. Super hard to sell into a shrinking market. Comparatively easy to sell into a growing market. So that's I think when you think about opportunities. We mentioned these other things, but the third thing that I think factors in a lot is you should really work hard. This comes to the motivation and to the partners, surrounding yourself with good people.
Yeah.
Like the difference that comes from a good environment, whether it's online, virtual, or whether it's in person, I think is an enormous, enormous difference.
And that's unfortunately not something you get right all the time. Relationships go bad. I've had, from personal experience, relationships that go bad 2-3 years later.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's super unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because everything does look good in the beginning a lot of times, but that's just not always the case.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of you have to be willing to, maybe this is, I remember Robert Kiyosaki and Rich Dad Poor Dad said 9 out of 10 businesses fail. So what that means is you have to be willing to start 10 businesses, right? It's like,
right.
Doesn't mean that it'll be the 10th one that will be the one that succeeds.
Sure.
But if you go into it saying hey, here's my one shot, and if I don't do it, I'm going to quit.
Right.
Well, you're probably going to fail.
Right.
And it's the same thing with ads, right? Like you may have to start a whole bunch of campaigns to make
Absolutely.
one work. You may have to design a lot of creatives.
So don't get the beginner's luck wrong. This isn't,
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't always cover you.
Yeah. What else is there? So that's I think when you're starting out. But what about, what are some other reasons people fail?
Oh, never mind. So sorry. So we have completely moved off this subject.
We've moved off of that. Yeah,
yes,
we're not on the iPad anymore.
I'm probably missing very obvious ones because fatigue is starting to set in.
I'm gonna help you out and say one that I think is relevant to you. I've certainly seen it with you, and I think is one that people tend not to do. And this is not about minor success. This is about bigger success, and that is that people don't compound their success. So, for you, a simple example is okay, great. You did email. You had success in there. You saved cash. You took that cash. You put it into paid advertising.
Right.
You were able to compound it. So one win feeds into the other. This is why it's so important not to buy the car or indulge or whatever. Is when you burn those resources, you're starting back from scratch. If you want to do anything big, it has to compound. So you have to, this is part of why playing win-win is important, right? Because if I do a project, I don't succeed, but I built some good relationships, then on the next project, I have those relationships that I can rely on, right? And so compounding things, like building something that lasts, very, very important.
And 100% true.
So that's like, I think a really, and there's lots of ways to do that, because of course you can compound your time, you can compound your money, you can compound your relationships, all these different things. Like, but yeah, that would be a really, really key one, is like build something that you can then have as a platform for the next one and the next and the next.
I mean, there's no doubt, if I bought me a car, I mean, even though it would be totally illegal, when I was 15 and having success with email, if it was legal and I did buy me a car, I can tell you almost definitively, it definitely would have affected my trajectory in my career.
Yeah.
Because of exactly what you said. I was able to take that money and just help compound it onto something else.
Yeah.
What other obvious thing am I missing? Something else?
So I think another one of them is environment. So we talked a little bit about people, but the willingness to go into an environment that is supportive for you, I think is really, really important.
Meaning, what is a supportive environment?
I mean,
like, I'm lucky enough to have very supportive parents and, supportive family. Not everybody has that, right?
Yeah, so look, I mean, this partially fits into that opportunity thing, right? It's just like, it's really hard to make $1 billion selling to Bangladeshis. Just is. Like, that's the reality. If you're in Egypt and you want to try and build a huge company, it's much harder than doing it in the United States. Mm-hmm. Just is, because that environment is constrained.
Yeah.
There are environments that have the nurturing pieces, and it's going to vary from one organization to another, but you should be willing to go and be very conscious of the fact of like, okay, where will serve me best? Where will serve this goal best? And we may need to relocate.
Yeah. Elon is not from the United States.
No, he's not. No, I mean, you can look at his namesake for Tesla, Nikola Tesla, right? Like, Nikola was born in Croatia, right? He went to Hungary to study. Then he went from Hungary to the US to go and be an inventor, right? Like, he probably couldn't have learned what he learned in Croatia. He probably had to go to Hungary for that. And he probably couldn't have succeeded in kind of the entrepreneurship type thing in Europe. He needed to go to like a little bit more free society for that, right?
Well, for me too, I'm from Greece. I came to Bulgaria not just because I like to travel, but also because I wanted to set myself in a much more beneficial tax environment that would then allow me to have more cash to pursue my business.
Exactly.
So
yeah, like that. And what this means, again, it changes, because it could be, where you go in terms of the like a virtual environment, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be physical, but I think being willing, like, it was certainly a hard thing for me to change relationships, right? You grew up with some people, you have friends, you like those people, but are those people supportive of, I don't mean like supportive of you, I mean, it's kind of the idea of like, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I've heard Larry Ellison talk about this, about growing his business to a certain point. And it was like this extremely challenging point where the people who were the right people to get them there are no longer the right people to take them to the next level.
Makes sense.
And having to let those people go. Like, this is an emotionally challenging process. And if you don't have the willingness to do that, well, that's going to put a limit on your success.
Sure.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of good examples of that. And that kind of fits to me into a really important thing that we haven't talked about, but is the idea of adaptation. Like,
wow. Yeah. Wow. That one's obvious.
But yet, we didn't say it. So
yeah. Adaptation.
Yeah. Like, your willingness to adapt and evolve, and I think the thing that goes along with it, of course, is continual learning.
Right.
Like,
so many businesses going under now with, like, we live in the suburbs right now here in Sofia, and the popular applications to where you could order food, there would only be a few restaurants where you can order from. And after hit, oh man, just
200 or something.
20x, right? Just because a lot of restaurants decided, look, we have to, get further out. We have to, make this extra effort. Otherwise, we're going to go out of business. And Yeah, I mean, and I've seen other businesses that, simply haven't done that, and in some cases they've gone bankrupt,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, going that extra mile. As a marketer too, I mean, every single year, I mean, Facebook has its own set of challenges, but there's tons of things that change at all times. That new policies, new laws, and all sorts of stuff.
It's one of the reasons why I think passive income is like a really bad goal. It's like there's a lot of people who kind of get sold this passive income dream of like, I want to just like not have to do anything and the money just rolls in.
Yeah.
And it's like, it rarely works. Left to its own devices, those things tend to fade into nothing because it requires that constant attention, tweaking, etc., to push and adjust it.
Unless it's something like real estate, which has proven to be pretty good for passive income, but
even then, if you're not managing the property,
I mean, okay, yeah, of course there's management, of course.
It's slower. Like, look, same thing. You could take your money and you could put it into bonds, or you could give it to some wealth management money manager, and okay, it's going to produce some kind of a return for you. But over the course of time, it will gradually, decline, unless it is somebody's giving it constant attention to, and maybe the attention, it doesn't have to be that constant, right? Maybe it's enough that you can do one deal a year. Okay, fair enough. But you got to do something to cultivate and grow that. Real estate is a pretty good one. There's a bunch that are not bad. But I think that it's just generally like it's a bad goal, I think. I don't think that people should pursue passive income typically.
Yeah. Well, they pursue it too early. You should pursue it when when you have a ton of money, right?
Yeah, I guess to me that...
Like you have 10, 20, 50, $100 million. Like you have to have some passive income.
I think that's ancillary though. I think the point is that's not your goal, right? The goal is not like the goal of, hey, I want to retire and live on the beach is a really bad goal.
Yeah.
It's very, very disappointing. Like, seriously, if you...
Live and die on the beach.
Yeah, like you just get to this, like, what are you contributing to the world at that point in time? What are you to me, the idea, like a big part of life is about maximizing your potential. Are you maximizing your potential sitting on the beach? No, not to say that you don't go to the beach. I love the beach, I'm happy to spend, a few weeks in Maldives every year. Wonderful, like to go and see things. But the truth is that shouldn't be where you live. That shouldn't be like the end result. That shouldn't be. It's so I think that's something. How do you think that the world has changed, and as a result, success has changed, or achieving success has changed in the last 20-ish years?
Well, the internet has absolutely changed everything.
And what do you think?
Information is a lot more accessible.
Yep.
You're able to, literally at the tip of your, fingers, you can just, access any piece of information you want.
Yep.
So if you want to learn a new skill, you're able to do that with much more efficiency.
So what do you think talk to me more about what the consequences of that are in terms of success and how the recipe for success is different.
Well, you're able to, I think speed of information is very, very important.
Yeah.
Accessing information faster. So
think about how hard it was to be a media buyer 30 years ago.
Yeah. And what it meant to be a media buyer too was probably a bit different. But yeah, I would start there. You're able to access all this information so much faster. You're able to join different congregations of, people, whether it be social media groups and stuff like this. And therefore you're also able to meet people a lot faster and, organize all sorts of masterminds and all sorts of stuff that are very beneficial to you. So I would definitely start there. I think that's super important. What do you think?
I think that the internet has been one of the most revolutionary things for the world. I think that speed, like you said, has been one of the big parts. and I think the other big one has been scale. I think that the combination of those two things has changed a lot of the old conventional wisdom.
Right.
So I'll give a few examples. Number one is, I think that although long-term thinking is important, short-term thinking is highly underrated. So the reality just is, in the world that we live in today, short-term thinking has such a high payoff. And much more so than it used to be. Like, if you just think about what was the value of short-term thinking back when you were on a farm 100 years ago, there wasn't much value in it, you know? Like, it's the famous Warren Buffett line, you know, somebody's sitting under a tree today because somebody else planted a seed 20 years ago, right? Today, I mean, I think, what is it, Yard or whatever the name of the company is, the scooter company went to $1 billion in like 9 months or something like that. Like, just crazy, right? Crazy. Before, it took John D. Rockefeller, the first person basically to do it, something like 40 years, you know? So
Yeah.
you just think about the compression of time. And so I think that a lot today, you should be really thinking about, it also makes speed of execution so much more important. We talked about execution, but speed of execution, very, very big deal. Like, you think about what Elon Musk talks about, it's just like pace of innovation as being this primary differentiator. If you're innovating faster, he's like, moats are nonsense. Moats are overrated. It used to be like, hey, your whole goal was to have a business with a moat. He's like, now your moat is that we simply innovate faster than the next guy. And if we're able to innovate faster than the next guy and go long enough, then eventually we're going to overtake them. And that's that. So that whole thinking, I think, is really, really important. I look at how fast things are changing, for example, in the DeFi space right now. Right? It's like, I think I might have mentioned recently, there was like some project launched, was revolutionary. Within a week, somebody had copied that project, you know, crushed it. Within like 5 days, 3 other people had copied those next people.
Yep.
Like, very, very fast. And within 3 weeks, that cycle's done. Like, it's burned itself out because there's so many people who have copied and done that thing. So you need to be like right on it, right? Extremely, very, very different approach. And I think that changes a lot of the conventional mindset around things like work hours, right? So if you think about kind of like a lot of the research on work hours, et cetera, is like, hey, you should not work more than 40 hours a week, your productivity drops and all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, that's true if you don't have a 2-week window.
Yeah.
But when you have a 2-week window, you better work 84 hours a week, because if you don't, you're not going to get there. And we see this with the Chinese, right? Like, Chinese just have this insatiable work ethic. They just like have, it's kind of like there's some expression about like, how far ahead are the Americans in technology over the Chinese? And they're like 12 hours, long enough for them to wake up, you know, copy it. So it's like that has changed things quite a bit. The next thing that goes along with it, and this really kind of upsets a lot of the traditional ideas around how discipline works, is the scalar effects mean that it's much more important to have something that hits, that scales, than being consistent on something that doesn't scale. Very, very different. So
No, speed and scale.
yeah,
If there's 2 major things.
those would be the 2 major ones. Yeah, and I'm trying to think like some ways that plays out for people. Like I said, one of them I think is certainly this idea of short-term thinking. I think is really a big deal. Think about opportunities where you can scale, because some opportunities just don't scale well, right? Like, doing a service doesn't tend to scale very well. It's quite ineffective. Whereas selling a product scales a lot better. You know, and there's a million different examples of. And then I think the thing I was touching on earlier is also a big one. Like, the significance of getting attention has never been greater. Getting attention was not that important back 100 years ago.
For sure. And I mean, as a marketer, I can tell you, even, I mean, you don't even have to go that far back. Like in my career, which is for most people not that long, I can definitely notice how the attention span of the average individual has
decreased.
shortened.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. When you started, how were email deliverability rates and like open rates compared to today?
Look, I wouldn't be able to compare from my personal experience just because I was in totally different industries.
Okay.
And it varies so much from industry to industry that I couldn't be able to tell you. I was in a completely different industry.
Yeah.
Guys, if we've missed anything that you've been thinking about that it's right here and you're like will they say it? While we've been going at it for 3 hours, comment down below. Huh?
How long? Yeah, probably. Yeah, longer than that.
No. We've been going at it for some time.
We've been doing it for a while. All right, perfect.
So I think we're gonna wrap this one up, guys. Let us know any feedback. We would very much appreciate it. We would like to tell you that we would like to extend the conversation to you. If you're interested in becoming a part of the podcast and being a guest, you should email us. The email is in the description down below, so look out for that. Let us know what would be the main things. What you're passionate about. If you've posted anything online, whether it be a YouTube channel, a website, or a blog where you have some thought leadership on the subjects that you're passionate about, just so we can get a little bit of an idea of what your thoughts are. And what else? Something else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, you're like, I think the interesting subject is just, hey, listen, what is it that you think are some problems in the world, some things that you'd like to discuss, some solutions, things that you're passionate about, because obviously we're going to frame whatever episode it is around some specific topic, some specific problem, some specific solution, technology, whatever. And we'd love to welcome you and discuss it and see how we can inspire some other people.
Other than that, thank you so much for watching the Solutions Podcast. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you on next week's episode.
See you guys soon.
See you soon.